You're listening to the Deus Volt Radio Show, because God wills it. Here are your hosts, John Michael Samick, Josh Johnson, and as always, the pastor of disaster, Ken Zitch.
Go.
Oh, yeah.
Let me read you this. I think this is a good way to start off our conversation here.
Let her rip.
Donald Trump tweeted two vague but hopeful tweets this morning, promising big progress and results to come in the next week. His tweet says, "We are making big progress. Results start to come in next week. Make America great again." And then he says, "We will win." Something that Trump could be referring to, at least in part, is this affidavit from a Detroit poll watcher who said an out-of-state truck showed up at a poll at 4:30 in the morning with a bunch of mail-in ballots for Joe Biden. Detroit poll watcher at 4:30 a.m. on November 4th, tens of thousands of ballots delivered from out of state. Unlike the other ballots, these boxes were brought in from the rear of the room. I specifically noticed every ballot I observed was cast for Joe Biden. That would be something worthy of a DOJ investigation, wouldn't you think?
Are you asking?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I would trust the DOJ or the courts or anybody to resolve this. I think it's corrupt. But if you look at Rod, I think it's Blagojevich or Blagojevich, whatever. He's a former governor of Illinois.
Yeah.
I believe Trump pardoned him, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, he
I
did.
can't remember. Now, he was actually saying that when he was involved in the Democrat machine in Chicago, back during his days of political activity, he said it was common for there to be, it was well known among the politicians that was happening, that, you know, people involved in organized crime or people paid off the street, junkies who needed crack, whatever, could be bribed to do things in the voting booths. You know, they would fill in stuff, they would throw stuff away, they would, at night, they would change things, they would intimidate people coming to vote. It was common. It's been around since the old Boss Tweed days and, you know, gangs in New York, right? There's been this kind of political activity for such a long time. And with Democrats being in urban centers, they've been doing these things. Now, what the former governor of Illinois said that was different this time was he never saw it on such a mass organized scale. And it was, in fact, he thought that it was actually incredible that they were able to organize such blatant corruption in plain sight with no repercussions and with the entire media supporting it, including Fox, for that matter.
Should we really be surprised, though?
I'm not surprised. I told you the other day, like, I didn't make it to the last podcast, but as soon as I saw you at the election, I said I thought this was what was going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't think that Trump was going to win, like an easy win or even necessarily win at all, because I didn't think they were going to let him.
Yeah.
I didn't think they were going to let him, because I also think Trump is a little bit of a symbolic figure. I would say
A figurehead, so to speak.
I would say more. I'm talking more in the historical sense. He symbolizes a certain time in a civilization. I would say the closest analog to Trump to ancient Rome would be the Gracchi, okay, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. They were populists in Rome who were elected officials. And what made them popular was because there was a lot of bad things going on in Rome at the time. Rome was starting to decline.
A lot of corruption. They were in favor of the people.
Yes, favor in front of the people, but also there were certain things that the Romans had failed to do. Typically, Roman soldiers who served sometimes 40 years stints, you know, overseas fighting, their farms back home were always supposed to be kind of like taken care of by the Republic. They were able to return home. But what was happening is their farms were starting to be allowed to go bankrupt, and then the wealthy senators were buying out these farms to add to their own plantations with slaves. And so poor, basically working families, and even families that had been part of the military and had served Rome with distinction and honor, were coming home bankrupt in poverty, having to move into the cities with immigrants and former slaves. And of course, the cities were swelling. There was mass immigration. There was crime. And the nobility, basically, the patricians, they were just getting wealthy based on changing agriculture from being more homestead based to being more mass marketed because of slavery driving down the prices of food, which is also another reason that small time farmers and homesteaders couldn't compete with the food prices that slavery allowed the patricians to have. So what the Gracchi were going to do was they were going to stop some of this stuff. They were going to stop these policies that were hurting ordinary working Roman families. Doesn't this sound familiar? And the Senate had him killed. Both the Gracchi were murdered by the Senate, even though they were represented the.
This was before Caesar.
This is before Caesar.
Yeah, I would assume. Yeah.
This is before Caesar, and I don't think Trump's a Caesar character because there's certain qualities that a Caesarian type figure has. Almost without exception, a Caesarian type figure is a military figure of some type. Trump is not, but Trump does remind me of the Gracchi because the sort of populist, nationalistic, more conservative elements, which even some of the things that the Gracchi had proposed involved elements of redistribution, which it would have been considered as left-leaning ideas even back then. This is even before the left-right distinction of the French Revolution, so it's kind of anachronistic. But in Rome, you did have conservative Romans who believed in the empire and expansion. You had Romans who were against expansion and believed that the wars were getting too expensive. So you had similar political thinking even then. There is analogs. And the Gracchi were a transitional. They were not necessarily following the conservative or more liberal thinking Romans. They were kind of like something that the more unspoken masses were wanting. They wanted land reform. They wanted things to change, that people could get ahead again where they weren't able to anymore, and that soldiers would be given the respect they were owed, which would be more of a conservative idea. But the patricians weren't going to have it, and the Gracchi were killed. Now, I don't necessarily saying that there will be an assassination of Trump, though I thought for a long time that is absolutely a distinct possibility that he could be assassinated. But he represents that movement, and the patricians did not allow it. They were just, even though the people en masse were going to get what they wanted if you were just to go counting heads. And I think the same thing could be said for Trump. I think the mass movement behind him is large enough that he represents a populist movement. However, it's not going to be permitted. The established elite are too entrenched, too strong. The people in the country are too lethargic because they're still too given to pleasure and self-indulgence. I think all Americans are. There just are. And, I hate to sound cynical, but half the reason I think the Pittsburgh Steelers are undefeated is because they don't want Western Pennsylvanians, who got the most ripped off of any other group in the entire election, don't want them paying attention to what's in plain sight.
To what's going on.
Yeah, that's how cynical I am.
Well, I mean,
wow,
that's
people.
Yeah, and I'm a Steelers fan. So what's that tell you?
That's a pretty. I don't know.
Well, you probably think it sounds somewhat conspiratorial, but I guess I would say
no. I do not think it's conspiratorial because I fully do believe that stuff like that happens. I believe that happens in the sports world.
Well, panem et circuitum, right? Yeah, bread and circuses.
Yeah, bread and circus.
Well, how many riots do we think would happen if Biden won outright? How many conservatives would really riot, or would they just say, "Well, this is how the system works, and we have to trust how the system works." Where you see all these liberals, all these Democrats go rioting and complaining and being upset in 2016, and you would have to assume that they would again, throwing fit. And these are the people that these are people that get their way, the people that throw their fit and complain like a little child. And this is where our country has come to nowadays. These are those are the people that are heard, and these are all the people that the media outlet listens to, and even the majority of media outlets have become these people that whine and complain.
Yeah, sure.
And just say, well, we need to have change, and we need to have progressive movement and social justice take place.
Yeah. No, I would agree. So I don't know if Trump is going to win in courts and all that. It's not impossible. There is a majority on the Supreme Court. It's not impossible, so I'm not going to discount it. But I wouldn't be surprised, and I think the general tenor of history is that Trump represents kind of a Gracchi moment.
Yeah.
Well, I disagree with you in one respect.
Go ahead.
And that is that I think that Trump may lose, but the thing about it is that I don't really believe that this is going to go away and everything is going to be okay after that. I think this is going to. I think this could very well touch off something.
Yeah, I just don't know if conservatives are going to be organized. A lot.
I don't.
Of it too
Well,
is
you
we
said it
didn't
yourself,
tolerate-
though, Josh. You
Go ahead.
said it doesn't matter about the conservatives. It matters about the populace. And see, the people is the people have been ripped off here.
Yeah.
And the thing is that we're not talking about your average Republican or conservative or anything like that, because, like you said, most of them are invested in this and they don't care anyway, because they figure they're going to be able to retain their power no matter what. But
Yeah.
the thing is that what you've done here is you've disenfranchised.
Yeah.
I think that Trump won this election, and I think he probably won it.
Oh,
with
I think he did
probably
too.
about 60 to 70% of the vote.
Yeah, sure.
I think he did. And the thing is that when you're talking about 60 to 70% of the population that agrees with what he represents, I don't think that.
Well,
this is
according to all the media outlets, the populists have been disenfranchised, and what are they doing about it?
huh? Well, what did they need to have been doing about it?
Well, no,
up
like what
until
are they
this
doing
point?
now? Like basically, if you go to CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, all the major media outlets,
They're not popular.
No. But that's my point, though. They are declaring that Biden won.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you're saying about not the Republicans or conservatives because they're too invested in the same system, but the populist group may have a reaction. Well, they should be reacting now, and they're not.
Well,
Like,
that's because I think it's like Trump. He says we're. I think they're waiting. I think they're waiting to see what happens because, see, the thing is that there's already out there too much evidence that there was fraud perpetuated on the population here, and I think that people are waiting to see, how this is going to play out
In the courts.
in the courts and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, here's another article from Epoch Times.
Yeah.
10,000 people, 10,000 dead people cast ballots
Yeah.
in Michigan.
Yeah, this is.
mean, It's
as
there's-
plain as day.
There's proof coming out
everywhere.
everywhere
Yeah.
that's showing that
This was not.
there's something messed up about this election.
It's actually
the way
inherent,
things went down.
It's inherent in democracy itself that it would eventually be corrupted anyway.
Well,
because- yeah, because
Yeah.
if you're
Yeah.
if the predicate for being in power is getting votes, then your incentive is to get votes, not necessarily following rules that would prevent you from getting votes. So if you can multiply votes, multiply groups, even illegitimately, quote unquote, whatever it takes, because power is going to be based on how many ballots are cast in your favor. So I think this is inevitable, but
there's
I don't
something
think we're
going
gonna, I don't
on.
think we're
There's
gonna do anything
something
about it.
there's something going on here that has been going on now for a while. I go back to Trump got elected because of what they were seeing happening in the country with regards to morality and stuff like that.
Exactly.
That's the reason why he got
Yep.
elected. And the thing is
Yep.
that if Biden gets into office, you're talking about a man here who will issue executive orders to allow men in women's bathrooms and stuff like that. This is not going to end well.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to do anything about it. I don't think the people of Western Pennsylvania or Michigan or Eastern Ohio, I don't think they're going to do a damn thing about it. Even if they go through the courts. First of all, if they go through the courts and the courts end up siding with Biden, I think half the people who even felt they got ripped off are like, oh, well, I guess the courts, we should trust the courts, and then the other half who doesn't, they might go on Facebook or Twitter and whine about it or go into a podcast like we're doing and whine about it, but they're not going to take up arms. They're not going to stop it. They're not going to stop it. And here's another thing that Biden's going to do. So after I watched the Steelers defeat the Cowboys, I went and I saw.
Oh yeah.
Think that was directed to somebody in the room.
That's,
I do. I think
noticed.
that was a low blow.
I know.
Yeah.
I just stated
Well,
a
it looks
fact.
like the Cowboys aren't going to make the playoffs this year.
Anyway, go ahead. After you saw the Steelers get
We're back to
lucky,
their third string quarterback. Either.
after you saw the Steelers get lucky against the Cowboys, you were
so
saying.
as
So much for
as-
being America's team.
Yeah, as I saw them continue their undefeated streak, I went to I saw a preview for 60 Minutes. It was showing what was going to be up. Right, one of the first things that was going to be up on 60 Minutes this past Sunday was like, oh, Trump's refusing to concede, da da da. Well, then they went into also is on the vaccine. So basically, they've got a vaccine now, and this was a general of the United States military, U.S. Army, I believe.
Yeah.
And he was the one interviewing on 60 Minutes, and he was basically making the case very adamantly that we have the vaccine, and we have enough of it that we're going to get it to every hospital in America, and we are also going to make sure that they give it. We're going to make sure that all the supply we get to those hospitals are given to the population.
Yeah.
It's a vaccine mandate.
Yeah.
And what we're going to expect with Biden, essentially here, and the thing that matters most, like for instance, let's talk about like transgender bathrooms. Just go there just briefly because Pastor mentioned it. Like, I don't think we're even going to have time to give a damn about that, because what we're going to be dealing with is 2 years of mandatory masks, which he said they're going to do. Mandatory contact tracing, which tracing all the people you're in contact with, which I think is absolutely immoral and contrary to our rights to privacy. But also on top of that, they were going to do a mandatory vaccine, which is basically a death sentence to a lot of Americans who will not let their children be medically raped through a forced inoculation. I'm one of those. So the thing is they're not. What I would predict is this: is if Biden gets in and is allowed to get in, I don't think anybody who, like in Western Pennsylvania, any of these Christian populist type people who stood up, I don't think they're going to do anything about it of any significance other than complain. That's my first prediction. And the second prediction is that Biden would work to implement some of these actions, or his administration, or Harris, or whoever is running the show there. It's really ultimately George Soros anyway. But what ended up happening is they're going to implement these policies, and these policies are going to be the ones that cause people to die, because that's where it's going to put people into a corner to then resort to violence, which is, once again, going back to medical tyranny, the medical establishment, scientific naturalism, and the 3 pillars of paganism.
Yeah.
Right? This is just it's now coming to fruition. It's no longer hidden anymore. The Marxism of the radical left basically is now become mainstream to such a point, and is in control of the apparatus to such an extent that, we're basically there. I mean, we're basically now talking about having to be underground, having to hide our acts. Sometimes, Christians are going to have to basically not tell the government certain things for fear of their lives.
I don't think that there's this going underground. I think what you're going to see is a war. That's what I think you're going to see. The war is inevitable. It's coming.
Hopefully.
Yeah, it's
Hopefully.
coming. I don't think there's any underground in the
Hopefully.
United States in this republic, because the thing is that there's too many people that own guns,
Yeah.
and B,
Yeah.
that aren't going to put up with the nonsense that's coming from the federal bureaucracy.
I guess I would say there has to be a
gonna be a
consensus.
war.
There has to be a consensus, though. So if they did a vaccine mandate,
I'm not. Are you listening to I'm not going to listen to a vaccine mandate. Are you?
I won't. But
I'm not. I don't want to.
Do you think all gun owners agree on that issue, though?
Huh?
Do you think all the gun owners in this country agree on that issue?
I would think. Yeah.
I don't know if they do.
I would think. I don't think all of them do. I'm sure there's exceptions,
Like,
but
how
the thing
many-
is that what I do know is I don't think that they care about the merits of the vaccine. The bottom line is that they're not going to go get a shot because the government tells them to.
No, but they'll get a shot if they think that the government
If
is right,
they
that
think
it's
that
for
it
their
would,
best interest.
if they think it benefits them,
Of course.
then they'll get the
They
shot.
might even be told that you don't have to wear them. You'll be exempt from the mask mandate
Well,
if you get your inoculation.
The point is,
I'm not going to wear a mask either. Are you?
Yeah.
Are
Well,
you going to wear a
but
mask?
I don't think
I'm not
that's-
going to
but
wear a
this is my-
mask.
This is my
either.
point, though.
That's not the
I
point,
don't know
though.
if there will be a unified movement on the right on that issue to be the basically the dividing line in the Civil War, because I think conservatives are split pretty evenly. If you were to ask me, if I were to talk to like my Republican aunt and uncle that watch Fox News religiously, who are pretty conservative on most issues, or go to like a fundamentalist church, like I think they would probably support a mandatory vaccination. I think a lot of people on the right would, because they would basically say that we do need to trust the institutions. They still have the Mayberry mentality, right? You go to your doctor, you trust your sheriff, you trust all of these institutions that are part of the America.
Trust your
right?
government.
Trust the United States military. If the United States general goes on 60 Minutes and says, hey, we got the vaccine and we have the resources to make sure everybody in America gets it, I think a lot of conservatives are clapping their hands.
I mean, hey,
like, rah, rah, rah.
conservatives-
Uncle Sam is coming with his general, and he's going to make sure everybody is protected from this pandemic. This is Americans coming working together.
Just to back what you're saying, conservatives were surely behind Trump when he came out and said, we're working on a vaccine, working on getting it out, and it's going to help people. It's going to help the whole COVID situation. So, I mean, Trump wasn't coming out and saying we're going to make people.
It was more edgy when he was actually working with what's his face, the Kennedy, who was actually
Fauci.
No, Kennedy, who was. This is when he first became president, and when he was campaigning in 2015, 2016, he was actually working with a member of the Kennedy family who was part of the anti-vax movement, a Democrat. Okay, so he was working because before the anti-vaxxers used to be mostly Democrats.
Yeah.
The all natural hippie type Democrats, eat organic, no vaccinations,
Yeah.
home births, something, let's say, a hippie would share with an Amish woman, right? These are views that they would actually share in common.
Yeah.
And that's a view that I would share in common because I'm actually against all of those things. I prefer midwifery. I prefer traditional medicine, natural medicine, holistic health, good home cooking, not any of that, any like artificial crap. Like, I think there's some justification to all of those points. So Trump was actually bucking the system when he was courting different Kennedys and like entertaining the anti-vax position. So once again, the same thing with military. Like when he got John Bolton as a member of his cabinet, like that was contrary to his populist instincts earlier. Why would you have a super hardcore neocon who wants to invade half the world like John Bolton? Why would you even let him in your cabinet if you were opposed to interventionism?
Yeah.
It just wasn't smart. He was listening to the wrong people. He was letting people advise him. He goes, "Oh yeah, he's done it for 40 years.
Well,
he must be qualified."
I think
like that's not how it works.
Sure, but I think the broader point that bears getting out, that bears speaking to what you're talking about is putting in this legislation, mandating things, putting through executive orders. The fact is, when you look at our government, in 70 years, we've gone from a government that was radically active in seeking out and pursuing and putting to death communist regimes to a government that now has members of it proclaiming communist agenda, proclaiming socialist agenda, putting it out there. And so we've already moved. We've already been moving in that direction over the past 70 years. And you said, another thing that you said about Trump being elected as president, I think people saw this. People saw a corruption that was going on in our government, and they wanted somebody who was an ordinary citizen and who they believed was going to do what he said he was going to do.
Yeah,
and that's why they put Trump elected Trump. But honestly, Trump he has done a lot over the past 4 years, but has he really changed the system? I mean, can one man really change this system? This system is corrupt. It is just getting worse and worse, and it's going down.
It's
it is going
hypothetical.
down in a downhill in a downward spiral.
Could the Gracchi have really reformed Rome? And I would say no. I don't think they really could have.
And so
they represent an impulse, but they don't represent an actual.
We have to be prepared for that. We can no longer have our head in the sand and think that everything that comes from the government is good, and any kind of change or any change is going to be affected that affects our society is going to come from the government. We can't be pie in the sky anymore. And a lot of conservatives, a lot of Christians are like that. They, like you just said, they expect the government, that everything that comes from the government is good news, that the government's trustworthy, that when the government tells them they're going to get certain benefits, they're going to get these benefits. We can't expect that anymore. We can't.
I'm not really I'm not really comfortable saying that Christians or conservatives are going to do this or that, because the thing is that
generalizations.
Sure. We don't know what they're going to do. Personally,
well, I said that's their perspective.
Personally, I don't think that Biden's going to win the election. That's the first thing.
Sure.
I think he's going. This is all going to be defeated in court.
But even if Biden
I
doesn't
think
win the
I think
election,
the handwriting's already
listen,
on the wall.
even
Is that
if
official
even
prediction?
even
Yes.
if even
Yes,
if
I
Biden
do.
doesn't win the election,
Yes.
okay, even if Biden doesn't win the election, Trump is in office for another 4 years. Are we really expecting that Trump being in office for another 4 years is gonna completely he's already in office for 4 years, and they try to get him out of office, and they did everything that they could, including spending hundreds of dollars of taxpayer money,
Well, here's what I think. I think that
impeaching
none
him
of that
and other
stuff,
things.
none of that.
And-
First of all, I don't look. I personally, and I would think that educated Christians would not be looking to Trump to begin with. I mean, the thing is that the government. The only thing that the government is here to do is to keep the peace so that people can pray and worship and go to church in peace. That's whatever. I don't look for the government to do anything.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily need a state to do
I don't
that
need
anyway,
a
but yeah.
state. I don't need a state. I don't need anything. I was glad that Trump was in office for the 4 years that he was, because, you know, we had a stable situation more or less in this country other than what they were trying to do to him. And if we get another 4 years, then that's what I'm looking forward to for another 4 years. It's just a stable situation. You know, the thing is that.
But these people are not going to go away. These radicals.
I know, and I
these-
don't. But the thing is, I don't care whether they go away or not, because all I'm looking for is to be able to have another 4 years of peace and let them do all their ranting and raving out there. You know, the thing is that I think you've seen it. Like I said, Trump
We
won.
got to take him seriously.
Trump
though.
won this election, and he won it with a greater percentage of the population than he did the first time he got elected. And I think if he gets another 4 years, and this is why they're trying so hard to delegitimize Trump and to get Biden into office, because if you go another 4 years and you see the prosperity and stuff like that and the peace that we have, the troops being brought back from different countries that are out there running, that they're having out there, be a policing the world and stuff like that. If you see all this happening, then what's going to happen is that Trump's going to pretty much be able to appoint his successor. And, you know, I mean, because he's going to win, that successor is going to just follow Trump's policies, and he's going to win by an even greater percentage the next time around. You know, so the thing is that these people,
Maybe.
these
Maybe he
people,
will.
the news, I took Fox News off of my thing here.
A lot of people did.
I want rid of Fox News. I want rid of MSNBC. I want rid of CNN. I want rid of them all.
Yeah.
I don't want nothing to do with them. They have nothing to say to me.
Mm-hmm.
The general that you were talking about a little while ago has nothing to say to me. He has nothing to say to my family. He's not gonna have any influence on whether we get inoculations or not. You know, he's not going to be able to tell me how to run my life. The government is never going to tell me how to run my life. And I'm certain, more than certain, basically watching the progression here over the past 4 to 8 years, ever since Obama started doing this craziness started in Obama's administration. The thing, you know, and I'm trying to restrain myself here because basically there's words for people like this, and they're biblical. We can look at Sodom. Okay, and we can go to sodomite, you know, and so on and so forth. I'm not interested in what these people have to say. I'm not interested in what they think. I'm not looking for their approval. I'm not. I could care less what they
But
think.
what I'm
they're
saying
going
is-
to they're going to lose.
The-
they're going
well-
down. They're going down, and I believe that. They're
Okay.
going down.
Wow.
Hey,
all right.
hey,
wow,
if
man.
If Trump's
He's-
not vindicated in
I
courts,
think for a master of
Hey.
disaster, this is the positives. I've seen him
I know,
speak.
he's
Wow.
excited.
That's a
I think
I have
that's
had
a positive message. I don't know what is.
I have had enough of these people. Enough of them. They are given entirely too
Yeah.
much attention. I despise having people running around, particularly people in my circles that talk about the elites. And these people aren't elite. These people are nothing. They're nothing but smoke and mirrors. And they're to be ignored.
I
They
understand
don't
where you're
have-
coming from,
yeah.
but you cannot deny the power and the influence that these people have over American minds, and I think you can't deny
personally,
where
I
our
think
country's been going over
I
the
think
past
you
70 years.
overestimate the influence that these people have over American minds. Most Americans could care less what these people think. They're out here living their lives in the boondocks
Okay.
and doing their thing, and you have never seen.
Well, maybe-
and that's why you can't say
maybe
what's
you need
going
to
to
start
happen here in
caring.
the future, because you have never seen what the Americans can do, what people who with conservative values will do when they're pushed into a corner. You know, the thing is that hit the end of this month is hunting season. Okay, people go out and go hunting deer. They go out hunting. They have these values. God help
Yeah,
anybody that comes in and tries
Sure.
to tell
sure.
a Western Pennsylvanian male
Sure.
that he can't go hunt.
But here's
God
the,
help him.
But here's the thing: these radicals. Okay, these people that you say we shouldn't listen to them. They don't. Their opinion doesn't mean anything, and I would agree with that. But they're organized. Okay, they're organized. They didn't get people elected. Look at AOC, for instance. Okay, I mean, how do you think she got elected in New York State?
Do you want me to tell
It
you?
was not.
The
Well, go
the
ahead.
same way that
Well, I'm saying
the
there was
same
a-
way
what I'm
probably
saying
that
is there
Kamala
was a
Harris
reason- there
became
was-
Attorney General of the state of California.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Sure.
I
that's
guess-
probably how I
Sure.
would say she got
Sure.
into
Yeah.
office.
I mean, it's not impossible. I guess
Yeah.
I would say, like, once again, though, that's an urban district that's also very young and leftist and has no morality. So, of course, they would vote for someone like
Yes.
her. Now, but I wanted to address.
But the point
something-
is they're organized. The point is that
I agree.
we need to take these people seriously, because these are the kinds of people that led to the communist takeover of Russia. And what happened is that the Russian government, the king, the czar, didn't take them seriously, and Russia was overturned. Russia became communist, and we need to take these people
Yes.
seriously.
Well, Pastor's point is that the Russian peasantry was not armed to the extent that the American
right.
populace is, and that the American populace that is armed, that is the kind that went for Trump, haven't been pushed. Now, he brought up hunting. He goes, heaven help those who would
Sure.
take away their hunting, but that's the whole thing.
I mean, we need to start forming
Listen.
preemptory
Can I finish-
militias.
Can I finish my point?
Go ahead.
Okay, so he said about taking away their hunting,
Yeah.
heaven help
Taking-
us.
yeah,
But I don't think
okay.
that's what's going to happen. I think that they're probably going to be allowed to hunt, and that's probably one of the reasons why they won't rise up, because I think we are too self-indulgent. So we'd say about Western Pennsylvanians
Sure, okay.
organizing.
Yeah.
They're not going to push us to the
Yeah.
point where we're going to battle. They're going to pacify us. They're going to say, okay,
Yeah.
well, Biden won.
They're not stupid.
And we'll extend your hunting, or we'll extend these other benefits. We'll let you have free Netflix for 2 years.
Good point.
That's the kind of stuff. Because look, you said about how much they like hunting. We like hunting so much that we would actually some of us would probably rather go hunting than pay attention to politics, and that's the flaw.
Understand, don't press the hunting thing too far, because
I'm
when
just
I
using
said
your
when I
analogy.
said and that's what I was using that for. My point about hunting is that there are values that people have within that you can't push too far.
Okay, well, technically, killing babies is a value we're supposed to take very seriously, but we tolerate millions of them being killed every year, and we don't shoot a round.
Yeah.
That's unfair.
Yeah.
That's unfair, because the thing
We
is
tolerate
that,
millions of murders a year.
Yeah, I
of-
know,
of
I know,
children.
I know we do.
And we do nothing about it.
I know
Yeah.
we do, and that's correct. You're right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Purge
But
the
the
evil
thing
from the
about it
midst.
is that the way they went about the killing of the babies, though, is it. The thing is that killing the abortion industry in the United States is pretty far removed from the actual conservative populist in America. Most Americans don't get abortions. Okay, that's just the facts. And most Americans probably only have cursory association with anybody. I've hardly ever. I have never in my life. I'm 62 years old, and I think I've only talked to maybe one or two people that have had an abortion. So the fact of the matter is that abortion is something that happens, but it doesn't really affect most
but
people.
you could say that about a whole lot of our values, right? Say gay marriage, like out here, there's not a whole lot of that.
No. Gay marriage was accepted, and see, the thing is that most people would be willing to put up with gay marriage as long as you kept it to yourself.
Yeah.
The thing is that where they crossed the line is that they went into the bathrooms, they went into transgenderism, they went into all kinds of stuff like that, where it does affect people.
Yes, but I haven't seen
Where
anybody
it
stop
does
it.
affect
I just
people.
haven't seen anybody stop
You
it.
saw at the last election. That's what I mean when I say that's the reason why Trump got elected.
So if Trump doesn't
Trump
win,
was anti-gay, though.
okay, well, no,
He was
wasn't.
anti-
No, he wasn't. He's not. He's the first. He's technically our first president who's actually supportive of gay marriage.
That's what I'm saying. He was not anti.
But
Trump
he's
was not.
not.
What I said was
Oh,
Trump
okay,
was
sorry.
not anti-gay.
Okay.
He's not in favor
Yeah.
though. Trump might be. It's like the rest of us.
Not in
Whatever you
favor?
do in your bedroom is your own business. If you insist on going in there and committing sodomy, go ahead. That's
Yeah.
your problem. You got to answer to
Yeah.
God. But see, the thing is that Trump was not in favor of having boys and girls bathrooms.
Okay, sure.
That's where you cross the line into what you can do
You mean
based upon what you're trying to.
Transgender bathrooms. Trump was opposed to transgender bathrooms.
Trump
Yeah,
was opposed
you
to-
okay.
Yeah,
it just didn't make sense what you said. It just, yeah, okay.
It had
transgender bathrooms. Yeah,
transgender bathrooms.
Yeah, girls and boys, yeah.
You started moving your values into my bathroom,
correct.
and that's why Trump got
It's
elected.
an imposition.
Correct.
It's
Yes.
an imposition.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I guess here's what I guess the thing is we won't know until it happens and we find out for sure. But basically, let me see if I get your prediction because I think we
Man.
have two contrary visions. Let me
You
just
certainly
separate-
changed from the other day in the car. You were
Okay.
talking pretty negative.
Hey, I want to bet a bottle of scotch on this. Okay. I think there's two possibilities. Okay.
The pastor of disaster over here is
Pastor of
starting to sound like the Pope of Hope.
No, there's no.
The Pope of Hope.
Listen. This is based upon. This is Josh's fault. This is Josh's fault. Josh is the one who.
Did you go? Wait, did you? Did you go out and buy your gun the other day, like you said you were going to?
tomorrow?
Did you go out? Oh, tomorrow you're getting
Tomorrow,
it.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
tomorrow I'm
Is it
getting
going to
it.
be a big one? Is
No.
that why you're so confident?
No, it
He's
doesn't
getting a
have
big
nothing-
gun.
Gun. The only thing guns do
He's
is
gonna-
defend your family. That's all you do. But the thing is that it comes back to what we've talked about, Josh, from the very beginning. Government is supposed to be an extension of God. There's
Yeah,
two kingdoms.
Whoa.
There's two. God. The
What do you-
the government is to be an extension of. You know what I'm talking about, John Michael.
Well,
The thing is that we're talking about the left and the right-handed kingdom here.
Okay.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Okay. I
thing is-
can guess at what you're talking about.
Well, then just listen and
Yeah.
quit interrupting, and I'll.
I
get
thought
to
that
it.
was the church.
The
though.
thing is that we got the left and the right-handed kingdom. The left-handed kingdom is to keep law and order in society, and the right-handed kingdom is to preach the gospel. Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is that there's no reason for a member of the right-handed kingdom to pay attention to anything that's going on with the left-handed kingdom unless you're committing a crime or you're violating God's law or something like that. The fact of the matter is that the left-handed kingdom has nothing to say to me as a Christian. Nothing. Nothing. Because everything that I base my life on, everything that I do
Agreed.
is out of Scripture.
Yes.
And
Well, I agree.
I will not tolerate being as though I'm a member of the right-handed kingdom. And this is what you're hearing tonight. I will not tolerate any interference from corrupt government officials in my life.
Good
None.
for you.
None.
What I'm saying is, I that's what I'm trying to say, though. Okay, we have to be serious. If you're going to say you're not going to
I'm
tolerate,
serious. I'm
Well,
serious.
I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about we, as in, those who are opposed to our government becoming communist, go to a complete government takeover of your.
The government isn't becoming communist. Our country is becoming more and more pagan. That's what's happening.
Yeah, but that's
Well, and like that hasn't been encouraged by the government.
Yeah,
like that hasn't been encouraged.
Yeah, I mean, I'm generalizing here, but the fact of the matter is that communism doesn't even register what the government might be doing in the way of socialism.
You don't have to call it communism. Call it
I call it social contract.
Government takeover. Okay, we call it. That's what we can call it. We can call it a government takeover.
Our government was a social contract from its inception.
Yeah.
Communism is just simply the highest form or the final end of all social contract governments.
Yeah.
That if they don't collapse in the meantime, that's what
Yeah.
their ultimate evolution will be in a matter of time. Just given enough time and patience, it will evolve into that final form, because that's the implication. The logical resting place of all public ownership is total public ownership, and total public ownership is communism, because there is nothing privately owned anymore. And all social contracts work towards that. American government believed in public ownership from the very inception, but they believed in public ownership only of those things that were belonging to the federal government, which at the beginning was just like the military and the courts and a couple other handful of things, but it's expanded with bureaucracy to all sorts of things: agricultural subsidies, medical stuff. I mean, basically all of these different things now are publicly owned regulations. The fact that you can't build certain things without getting permission from the government means that you're, even those areas where it's supposed to be private ownership, your ownership is still contingent upon getting permission from the state. So once again, we are just in a late stage of a social contract government that is public ownership has expanded to the point.
There's already laws set in play. Okay, there's already laws. I mean, I was just doing my mandated reporter this afternoon, which you have to do because if you're working with children in any way, and I'm director and a teacher at the preschool, and I mean, just the fact that I have to sit down and do a mandated reporter and look at and go through all the paperwork and look how much the government has control and has a say over how we interact with children. And you can. It's up to you to, if you see any hint of abuse, to go to the government, to go to your local government, and to point it out. I mean, it's happened over the course of the past 70 years, and it's been, or even longer, and it's been a slow and gradual increase of government control over the populace and over what you can say and do in your own household.
Yeah, I would say, because like you said,
when it comes to raising your own children and how you discipline your own children.
Well, to Pastor's point, I guess to address
and now
Pastor's point.
now we're like, and now we're even categorizing abuse. We're even categorizing things such as emotional and mental abuse as well. That's on the radar, not just physical. I mean, go ahead.
Okay, so to address Pastor's one point about the right versus left hand, and regarding the kingdoms of God, which I wanted to get into the two kingdom stuff at some point anyway, to clarify Lutheran.
Well, that's a later
versus
discussion.
Reform.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, basically, so because I kind of agree with Jacques Ellul's form of Christian anarchism and opposition to the state, what I would say is obviously God works in two different ways. He works through the means of grace, word, and sacrament, and the keys of the kingdom, including excommunication, exorcism, these sort of spiritual powers. And then you do have the kingdom that's basically the government, the restraining of evil via God's law, administered through various forms. It can be a monarchy. It could even be a democracy. It can be a social contract. A social contract government can be used by God to restrain evil. Anytime a social contract government, or even if a socialist government, for instance, let's say China or the Soviet Union, punished a murderer with death, it was executing God's law for good. Okay, even Soviet Union, if it did that, because at the end of the day, it's a performative. Okay, when it comes to the law.
Yeah, and let me say something before you go on. That's what I was. That's where I'm coming from with Trump being elected 4 years ago. You know, the thing is that I don't care. I don't care what he does as a president or anything like that. The only thing that I wanted him to do, and he has done, is that he has upheld some solid law that prevents perversion from entering into our lives or encroaching into our lives more than what it had. He had put a stop to that. That was done. That was it was that far and no more. It could go no more.
Yeah, so it's a retroaction. It's a move of self-defense. I mean, once again, for me,
and that's what I think people put him in office.
Yeah,
for.
well, because of my opposition to the state.
I don't think anybody was looking for Donald Trump to do anything as big as a president, or to have any of these overturn abortion or anything like that. I think that people were just tired of what was going on.
Some people were naive enough to maybe think that he could make those kind of big systemic changes. But
I didn't.
But I would
I
argue,
wasn't.
But knowing that the social contract itself is the problem, you wouldn't.
But when you said that the social contract is usable, can be usable by God.
Of course, God used
that's-
Nebuchadnezzar, but I wouldn't legitimize his government
No,
either.
no,
Yeah.
and you see the same thing with Trump.
Sure.
God used Trump.
Sure.
But I don't care about the rest of it. I mean, I'm not legitimizing Donald Trump's administration or what they're doing in the education realm or anything like that.
Yeah.
If you're dumb enough to send your kids to school and I'm not even saying you have to homeschool. I'm just saying that if you're dumb enough to send your kids to school and not pay attention to what they're getting taught in school. Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, that during the War of 1812, it was the Americans that were agitating the Indians to attack the British out in the settlements. If you believe that kind of nonsense, then that's your problem.
Yeah.
I can't do anything for you.
Yeah. At some point, though, we're going to have to probably talk more about compulsory public education at some point anyway.
No, I wasn't getting into that.
Yeah, because the morality of that is also becoming more and more dubious with the way that the things have been going.
Well, it's the teaching that they're doing. The stuff that they're teaching is absolute nonsense. I've seen it.
Yeah.
Well,
I've seen it.
The only point that I'm making, okay, and I think that, again, Bear is saying, is that we must understand where these people that are opposed, these leftists, okay, these socialists, okay, we must understand the threat that exists. They are a serious threat.
You already said that, and his response was he doesn't care about what the left or the right hand is doing. I mean, what the left. Okay, I can
left
get
hand.
Which hands we're talking about here? But basically, the secular realm, the state.
I don't care about the secular realm.
But here's my. So that's like the 2 points that you two are going to butt heads on. But my rebuttal to Pastor's position is this: on that is that the kingdom that we're disregarding, like, we have to make a line, okay? As in what sense is it interfering with us, and we do need to care, and what is
we better care.
Okay,
we better care because
well, time out. Let me clarify something if I'm understanding what you just said. When I say I don't care, that doesn't. What I mean is that I'm not going to allow it to interfere in my personal life. You can look at my past 40 years of life, and you can see that I definitely care.
Okay. What about? Okay. Well, let's draw. Well, no. But let's draw some concrete examles, because that doesn't mean much to me.
Right.
So, like,
I finished. Let me just.
All right, but I think your point may be addressed.
Well,
by
my
mine,
point.
so go
There's
ahead.
my point, though. I mean, they're organized. Okay, they have a purpose. They have methods. They have formed these cultish groups. Okay, that are hook, line, sinker in with their ideology, in with everything that they stand for. Where are our groups? Where is the unity? Where is the unity among Christians? Where is our
John Michael?
Where are groups that are
it?
standing
Is that
on
we
the
are
opposite
a member?
side?
We're a member.
Our groups are pagan, so
We're a member of the right-handed.
most of our groups are pagan now too. So
Yeah, and those who are not, we're members of the right-handed kingdom. The thing is that
this is why I wasn't finished, John Michael, because I said my point might address yours. You guys are just going to go back in a circle again.
Yeah, well, no. I'm just saying. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it at this. The thing is that I'm, as a member of the church, as a member of God's right-handed kingdom, I am fully confident that whatever they're doing out there is going to be in vain. They're not going to win. They're going to lose.
I mean, obviously, from a Christian eschatological perspective,
no.
we don't
I'm
disagree.
not even talking about eschatological. I'm just talking about it's going to fail. It's going to fail. It has to fail because it's unlawful. The thing is that there's nothing unlawful that can persevere for very long. Nothing. And you can look down through history and you can see that. You know, lawlessness is going to destroy itself. It's going to implode upon itself.
All right.
There's not any future for these people. And when I say I'm not paying attention to them, that's what I mean. I don't care what they do because they're going to fail.
Yes, but no,
They're going to fail.
But if a pastor said the exact same thing in September 1917, that doesn't nullify the destructive power of the Bolsheviks. Okay, that doesn't nullify what they did. It doesn't nullify their immorality. You can say, well, they're gonna fail eventually because so that sort of lawlessness will fail. But it was still, 80 years of darkness. So my point is
but
that
there's all kinds of
they might fail eventually, but not before they run you over and and leave you lying in the dust.
But to be fair, I understand what Pastor's saying.
Listen,
but all I'm saying
the
is
Jews in Babylon were pestered and so on and so forth. The whole time they were in Babylon, they had to live with the fact that their country was gone and stuff like that. But in the end, they had their faith. The thing is,
that's a horrible example, though.
Because
the Jews that were in Babylon because they did nothing, because they allowed themselves to be perverted by the other nations. The Jews were in Babylon because they were being judged.
Yeah, how are we're not being judged?
Yeah.
What I'm saying is there's always hope as long as
you have faith.
as long as there is time, as long as we have freedom, there's always hope. There's always time.
Okay.
There's always hope.
But-
And it doesn't even matter. We need to be doing what's right, no matter what's going to come down the chute. We need to be doing what's right. Period.
Correct. Now, I want to address Pastor's point now, and I'm going to insist on it. Okay. So here's the matter.
Go
okay?
ahead.
Now,
Yeah.
in dealing with that issue,
Please.
okay, we have to have concrete examples. So if we're not going to concern ourselves with the kingdom of the right hand, so to speak, and
mean
with
the left hand.
whichever hand we're talking about now. Yeah. So regarding the civil authorities, right, without the civil use of the law, okay, regarding that group, okay, we're not. We're indifferent to them as an entity in a sense, and that goes back to Augustine and the city of God, and are traversing as pilgrims in this era, in this world. Okay. However, like when we say that we're not going to tolerate their interference in our lives, we need to be able to say, okay, in what ways do we mean here? Okay. So, for instance, if they interfere in your life and tell you have to get a permit to build your deck, are you going to resist? Because that's interference.
Yes, I'll
in your
buy
life.
the permit to build my deck.
Why?
And the reason why is because that has nothing to do with my spiritual life. I mean, the thing is that they can, there's God. Jesus says, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar, and give to God what is
Caesar
God."
wants you to wear a mask when you go
I'm
to the
not
grocery
going to
store.
wear a mask.
Now, why not?
Because that's an intrusion.
Why is it an intrusion?
It's an intrusion into my. The
permit's
fact
an
is,
intrusion.
the fact is that I have two things going for me right here. First of all, I have myself as a Christian. The thing is that I don't run around with a mask on because I don't need people to be thinking that my trust is in a mask. My trust is in God.
Well, no, it's not supposed to be because you have a trust in a mask. It's because the state asked you to wear a mask.
That's the thing. The state is asking me to do something that is a violation of my faith.
Okay, well,
my faith is in God.
I would say a building
I
permit
don't
is
worry.
too. I would say a building permit is too. It's
Okay,
violating
you
my
can,
right to property.
and I wouldn't argue with you if you think that to be the case. But there's this thing called adiaphora.
But where do we? But some people could say a mask is adiaphora because, first of all, it's not affecting necessarily. Your spiritual
and I
life.
would say the same thing about a mask. And I've said this to the church: if you feel like you need to wear a mask, then you wear a mask.
Yes, but you're talking about not listening to what that kingdom over there is doing and behaving until it interferes with your life. And right now,
But
right now, we just disagreed on what that means because yours like it can't tell me to wear a mask. They're not going to make me do it. But we disagreed on a building permit and a mask just now, saying that it's either a line in the sand or it's adiaphora.
But what I said from the beginning, though, is that see the thing is you can have these disagreements. That's fine.
But that's not war, though.
But
you're saying that we're talking
see
about
what
war.
I'm talking about here is that there's going to be the government. I believe this, and I believe this with all my heart. I believe that the government a couple of years back, with the Supreme Court ruling, they crossed a line. They crossed a line.
What do you mean by crossing a line? Like war? Like
they
we
went
need to
they
kill?
went from being a legitimate, like you said, God can use social contracts.
Correct.
He's used America from the beginning.
Yes, he's used
Okay.
evil governments.
He's
many
used
times.
evil governments.
Sure.
But to see, the thing is that America went from potentially be a government that could be used into something that's completely out of line.
Okay, well, if it's completely
Out
out
of
of line,
line.
then why do we obey anything that it tells us?
I would suggest that we're getting to the point that we shouldn't be obeying anything
but
that
I'm
this
saying,
government says.
okay, which would include building permits. But my
Yeah,
point is,
yeah.
because we're saying line in the sand, intruding in our lives, enough's enough. We're using language that says definite action. But I want to know that. What is an adiaphora? Like, what is now this is time to kill? Okay, like what is it? Is it when they say that that you kids have to get a vaccine? Like that we're gonna come to the door administer? At that point, would we say to Christians, yes, you can shoot them?
That's what I would say. Yes.
Okay, because that's
Yes.
what I want to know. Because if we're going to say that, okay,
If you're going to come to my door and you're going to try to order me and my family based upon the fact that I've already seen that you don't have my best interest at heart, you don't. Because none of this,
But
the
they're gonna say
whole
it's your best interest.
the whole coronavirus thing has pretty much been a farce. But but the thing is, for those people who believe in it, that's fine. But see, the thing is that you're not going to come to my door and tell me that I have to get a shot. And if you try to enforce it on me, then you're going to have a gun battle.
okay,
Well,
that's an example. That's a concrete line.
but that's the point here. The point is they're unified enough that they will come to your door, and if they have
but,
to,
but
we
what's
need
that have to do with the price of tea in China? I mean, good. If they do, they do. I mean, so what do you want me?
Price of tea
What?
in China.
What?
Chinese tea.
What's it has to do? What do you mean? What does it have to do?
What
need
you're
to be-
saying is
I'm saying- What I'm
self-evident.
saying,
I mean,
is
okay.
we need to be. What I'm saying is we
Okay.
need to be unified.
Okay.
Okay.
No,
So
I
like,
don't need to
our
be
Constitution.
unified. I just need to have a gun, and I need to be ready to protect myself.
You're gonna okay.
There's
you're
people
gonna
out there
defend
who are
yourself.
going to do what they're going to do.
You're going to defend yourself against the
But we're talking
United
about,
States
yes,
government.
But we're talking
Okay,
about Christians
yeah.
as a group.
Let's
What
see
we
how that
need to-
works.
We're talking about advising Christians as a group, right? Deus Volt Radio Show, right? We're trying to talk about Christians who are in the last remaining
Listen.
warm coals of Western civilization on how they should act. Like we're
and
trying-
I would
we're
and I would
acting
and
as
I would
advisors.
I would hope that the people who are listening would in fact be doing what I'm saying I would do.
Yeah.
The thing is that you have to look at this government now from a different perspective than what you've looked at it in the past.
Okay.
You have to.
It's
You
not,
can't-
but
you-
it's
you
not
can't-
good
you-
enough. Even the early church knew that they needed to be organized. They needed to come together.
We will get
They need-
organized if in fact there are people out there who
But
want
this issue, the thing that you said would be a gun issue, let's say a vax mandate where they came to your house to require a mandatory vaccination, you're saying at that point that would be a line in the sand to shoot. But would we even be able to say that the majority of, let's say, LCMS ministers would even agree with you on that statement?
I can't help what they.
Well, that's my point, though.
I mean, I can't do
This is
nothing
where
for
this is going to his point about the unity, and this is the problem.
Yeah.
This is why
Exactly.
This is why we're in trouble.
Exactly.
Because we can't agree on what the line in the sand is that we need to go to blows for. In
Yeah,
fact,
yeah.
if we wanted to go
Yeah.
to the blows on the vaccine mandate,
Uh-huh.
for instance, there may be ministers who
Yeah.
would share ordination with you who would be like, you know what?
Yeah.
You should be shot for refusing a vaccine mandate because it's not about you. It's about helping elderly people. It's about you go down the line, whatever their arguments or excuses are going to be. And we have to have answers for that. We got to say, no, doesn't matter what you think. This isn't adiaphora. It's not up to you as an LCMS master to say to your shepherd, to your flock, it is or is not okay. It's up to you. It's not up to you.
Okay, well,
this
let
is
me-
wrong,
let-
and it is to die for, and we have to be agreed on it.
I'm going to try to clarify. Yeah, I understand some of what you're saying there, and I agree that there will be people, the unity, and so on and so forth. But the thing is in the end, Josh, doesn't it have to be God that provides the unity?
Well, correct, but that's not my point. My
I
point
can't.
is,
I can't.
That's
You know,
fine.
the thing is that I'm going to make a stand, and I think you'll make the stand with me, and so on and so forth. We'll make a stand, and in the end, you know, if people are going to join or they're going to be a part of that, then they're going to be a part of it. If they're not, they're not.
yes, but that's not what my
That's
issue
not
is.
the
No, no, no.
point, though.
I'm not saying about. I'm not trying to preclude the work of the Holy Spirit to move people into
Well, what
unity.
what are you
What
saying?
I am saying is we have to have objective arguments. We have to have objective arguments that when we deal with people who would disagree with us on this issue, that we can concretely refute them and say, no, here is why.
Okay, give
you
me an
should,
example.
as the vaccine mandate.
Well,
Give
more
me
than
a-
that,
give me- give me
we
an
have to be
example.
educating people. We have to be educating people in what's right,
Yeah.
so that we can have we can come together and be unified.
And we
need to be
We're
unified.
trying to do that.
Why
but
would
the-
refusing a bit? Why would
Well,
refusing
I want to
a
know. That's what
vaccine-
I want. I want
Yes,
a concrete
why?
example.
Here's the question, okay?
Okay.
And this is how. And pretend I'm another pastor in the LCMS.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, who
Yeah,
disagrees with
sure.
you?
Fine.
Pastor Zitch, if you're going to say that it is biblically justified violence to resist a vaccine mandate, why? What is the biblical basis to refuse a vaccine mandate?
well, we don't have to get into that right now,
Well, I'm
but
saying,
that's the question that has
would
to be. Yeah.
That would be the question. If we're talking about a line in the sand, like,
Yes.
okay, this time they've gone too far.
Yes.
This time, this is it, buddy. This is the last time. You know, the killing 100 million babies. You know, we let that one slide. But this time is. This time is really it. This time we're gonna
Yeah.
take it to guns.
Yeah.
This time we're good. What is it?
We
What
got
is the drawing line?
them educating our children that we evolved from monkeys, and that if you wanna have sex, go ahead, just to use birth control. I mean, they've taken our culture over hook, line, and sinker.
We've tolerated all of it up till now. All of it. So I am I would love to hear what it is that one thing, right, that's going to be too far, apart from just persecution. Like, is it literally just because we claim the name of Christ and want to live as Christians that is going to be where we actually finally unify when we're in line to the guillotine? When we're in line to the guillotine, we're all finally going to agree that this is where we're
Josh,
going to have to stand.
yeah, I understand what
Well,
you're
it's gonna
saying, but
separate-
the thing is that
Because they're not coming right after
what
us.
you're asking for is, you know, the thing is that that's long gone.
Yeah. I'm not
It's long
asking for what
gone.
Pastor
The
Zitch
thing
gonna
is,
do.
no.
I'm asking for what we
The thing,
should
no,
do.
no. I'm talking about our civilization.
Sure.
You know, the thing is that you know we've gone through things like the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and so on and so forth. The thing is, the fact of the matter is that people aren't the same as what they were back even when the church was founded. Okay, the thing is that people have this insane thought that they can think for themselves today, and that's been given more and more credence over the centuries. I mean, the thing is that people think they know what's best for themselves. They think they know what they can do. And that's why you have that's why you have all of this today. And we're not going back to the simple days when, you know, the thing is that my contention remains that we're going to have to have faith. That's what you're going to have. Whether unity comes and is provided or
Well, sure.
not, we're going to have faith.
Yes.
That's
But your
what we're gonna have to
prediction
have.
would be that Trump would win, and that if he doesn't win, that the populist support for Trump is so great that in the face of such blatant corruption, it would result in a
No, that's what I would
reaction
hope.
That would result. Well,
That's what I would hope.
But yours sounds like okay.
That's what I would hope.
So, but what
I
I'm
mean,
saying is,
I'm
okay,
hoping that kind of thing
I'm
happens.
presenting two visions here. Okay,
Okay.
so the one vision is saying either Trump's going to win through the courts, or we're going to have a civil war, and the other side will say that Biden will likely win. And if that is the case, we're going to be starting the first major step into the stage of object persecution of the church. So, and that's kind of what I'm saying. I don't think that,
There's another option there.
I think the leaders of this country who are our enemies of Christians, are smart enough. I think they can count. They can count how many gun owners there are in this country, and they can count how many guns are out there. The elites that are control, they're not dumber than the admiral of the Japanese Imperial Navy who said that behind every blade of grass will be an American with a rifle.
Yamamoto.
If you think that the leftist elites didn't read that quote, we'd be asinine and naive. They know absolutely what they're up against. I don't know whether we know what we're up against, but they know what they're up against, and they're not going to come right out and be like, you know what, we're just going to go invade Appalachia and think that this is going to turn out good for us. They're going to come at us sideways. That's how they think. I'm quoting actually Serenity and the Firefly series, which is a great series, by the way. Plug for that show.
But that's our job.
They're going to
that's the church's
They're going to
job.
come at us with vaccine mandates.
Yeah.
They're going to come at us with masks. They're going to come at us with rationing. And if you want to go and get your flour for the week, you have to do X, Y, and Z with your children. That's how they're going to come at us. And that's the kind of stuff that these gun-owning Christians actually aren't on the same side on. They don't actually get along on this issue, and that's why they're not going to work in a civil war where all the gun owners are going to fight the elitists, because the elitists have already deceived and divided the gun-owning population between 100 different varying beliefs on any number of issues. You know, got one gun-owning conservative here and another gun-owning conservative here. Well, they're not going to agree on.
But what I don't understand, I hear what you're saying, and I agree
they're
with what
united.
you're saying, but I don't understand what the point is. I mean, what are you going to do about that, Josh?
As far as what
are you going to do about that? I mean, the thing is, you're talking about what's reality in this world right now. That's exactly what's happened, and so on and so forth. What are we going to do?
All I'm doing is criticizing the idea that there's going to be a regular, blatant civil war, and I'm basically saying that our opponents are smarter than that, and we are too apathetic to resort to that unless we are put in such a blatant corner. And I don't think our enemies are going to try to do that. Our enemies aren't going to try to put us in a blatant corner where we're going to have violence.
It's you and John Michael who have been arguing this unity thing. Okay? The fact of the matter is that that is not something that I'm even considering. The fact of the matter is that I'm looking at my wife and my children and my house, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do
I agree.
to protect my property.
But that's not biblical.
The thing is that unity comes as God provides it.
Yes, but see, I'm not arguing
that's the bottom line.
What does that even mean?
I'm only agreeing with John Michael.
What does that
on
even mean?
The observation. I'm only agreeing with John Michael on the observation that our enemies are unified, whereas we are not. That's the only observation. That's what I'm agreeing with John Michael on.
Then we're at a disadvantage.
I'm not. Okay, that's all I'm saying. But I'm saying is what's more realistic here is that we're going, because basically this all goes back to is I had mentioned that we're going to get into a state of a persecuted underground church. This is where this.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Yes, and you objected to that.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Ownership, and that the group will fight back. But this has been my rebuttal now to that objection. Your objection was.
Well, we talked about this way back when we talked about what would happen in certain instances with the country. The thing is that the country is going to break up, is what it's going to do. There's not going to be any federal government down the line if they continue doing the things that they're doing.
People are going to so too.
People are going to break away from that.
We don't know.
Economically,
we don't know.
It should collapse, or else it'll greater centralization. I mean, if there's any government that has the potential power to become more centralized and more dictatorial,
it's going to collapse.
It's the United States. Well, I would hope so, but once again,
it's going to collapse.
The Tsarist Russia should have collapsed too, but it didn't collapse. Something worse emerged out of Tsarist Russia. Tsarist Russia was in a depression. Their military had been humiliated, and not only in the Russia-Japanese War, but then also in World War I. I mean, there was nothing, and they had a huge famine in the 1890s. Like, Russia was collapsing. Okay, the Romanov dynasty was collapsing.
Well,
it wasn't the end of the story.
Well, there's another aspect to that too, Josh, but we don't want to talk about that here today. The thing is that you have to look as far as if you're going to use, and I'm not criticizing you for using it. I'm just telling you that if you're going to look at Bolshevik Russia and the czars and the collapse and giving way to communism and stuff like that, you can't discount the fact that this was prophecy being fulfilled. I mean, that was coming. That was foreordained, and it was going to happen. I mean, the thing is, that was a unique period of the world's history, And that was exactly what was going to happen according to Scripture.
Yeah, but we could say that we may be walking through the fulfillment of prophecy now.
And we could be.
Okay,
I
we
agree.
could be.
I
Could
agree.
we? But I'm saying is,
I agree. People are tired of hearing the frogs croak, Josh. The frogs have been out there croaking, and people are tired of it. That's what's happening here.
Alex Jones said the frogs are gay. Did you guys hear that?
Oh, they are. They're what's it called? They're bisexual. They're
Bisexual frogs.
Yeah.
Well, that's all nice and good, but if people aren't unified, they're not going to be able to do anything about it.
Well, he's saying that unification is not something that we're going to be able to achieve anyway.
Yeah. I mean,
That's I don't believe that.
I do.
I believe that we can.
What
achieve
makes you think that there's
unification.
unification? But even Josh,
believe
you
we
laid
can.
it out perfectly.
Yeah, how would we
I mean,
unify?
how would we unify? How are we going to unify?
Well, we
I
start
mean,
with where we start with is talking, having a conversation. That's where we start.
While we're here, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's how we start. I mean, how does the left unify? You think that all these
They
people
unify because they're all pagans and they have the same program in before them. They're
Well,
pagan.
there you go.
They're
I
pagan.
mean, they're Christians, and we have the same program and agenda before
We're-
us
yes,
too, and
we're
we
supposed to
should.
have- yes,
the
we're
Word
supposed-
of God.
Yes, a
I mean,
unified worldview.
I mean, for crying out loud.
Yeah, we have a
You know?
unified worldview, but
How
we
could they unify better than we to the point where
here's how. Here's how. Because the fact of the matter is that many Christians are kinos.
well, that's okay. That's the point.
They're
Then we need
Christian
to-
in name only.
That explains even more. That speaks even more to my point, though. That's why even more so we need to be talking. We need to be engaging with one another so we can figure out who is the genuine oracle and who is just playing.
You know
who
what
is just
does
playing
that, John
patty
Michael?
cakes?
You know what does that?
who is just playing? Ring
know how
around the
that-
rosy. I
you
mean,
know
we're
how
not
that
playing.
happens?
We're not playing pretend here. This is not Christianity. It's not going
know
to
how
church.
that happens,
It's not
John
just
Michael?
a
Persecution.
cultural thing.
Persecution.
Yeah.
That's how it
Oh,
happens.
but that
okay.
was
So
my
let's
argument,
just
though.
wait for
That's
persecution. Okay.
persecution.
So
No,
let's just
but
yeah.
that's
Okay.
What, to
All
be
right.
honest, but that's my point, though. My argument is that we're going to be heading into a persecuted underground church, not a civil war, because of disunity.
Okay.
We are not unified.
But don't
enough.
rule out the fact that the persecution, yes, it will lead to people who share the same values that they ought to with regards to the gospel, but it could also lead to war.
Let me tell you something.
And
though.
it will lead to
hey,
war.
Hey.
It
Let me
will
tell
lead
you
to war.
something though. The church, if you look at the early church, persecution is not what unified them. They were unified before persecution. Persecution just made it clear they were unified. So if persecution comes upon us and we're not unified, it's not. You can't expect that persecution is going to make us unified. It's going to point out the fact that we are not unified and we're all going to be slaughtered. That's what's going to happen.
John Michael,
Okay,
I don't,
but
I
look
don't
at
follow
Slovakia.
that. But
Look at Slovakia. Slovakia was primarily Roman Catholic. There was minority groups like some Lutheran and some Orthodox, but majority were Roman Catholic. Okay, so you had ideological unity, but the Roman Catholic Church in Slovakia did very poorly under communism because of laxity. Okay, so they were unified, but they were apathetic. I would say we have both problems. We don't just have disunity. The people that are Orthodox are so lazy in their understanding of their doctrine or their theology or their piety or whatever it may be. You know, they're so it's like I've said to people before, if a church father would walk into a modern even an LCMS church, I mean, they would recognize some aspects of the liturgy, but other than that, the people there, they wouldn't regard as Christians, I don't think. I don't think the church fathers would regard the majority of American Christians, even sincere ones, as even being legitimate Christians. The moral practices of Christians today is so lax and wicked that they would be shocked that the behavior was even tolerated. And the thing is like, we're not going to be able to stop that now. It's like it's everywhere. And the thing is,
and I agree with that. We're not going to stop that. That's not going to.
But we still need to be here trying to gather the people from the four winds, right?
And we are.
Yes, and that's what we're speaking to. We're speaking to people out there.
Well, we're not going to stop what? What are you talking about that we're not going to stop? We're not going to stop the church from being corrupt. We're not going to stop the church from going basically
We're not
to
going to do any
hell.
of those things.
We're not going to reverse its current state of degeneracy.
We're not going to reverse those things. We're not going to stop
The American
those
church's
things.
current state of degeneracy, it's right where it's at now.
Then why are we even? Then what's the point of being here?
For the elect.
Okay, well, okay, I see what you were saying, Joe Michael. Okay, so to answer your point, why
For
are
the
we
elect.
Okay.
But the elect is the church. I mean,
but not all that's in the church is in the elect.
I'm not doing the things I'm doing because I think that the church is going to be in a big revival and the United States is going to turn around from its current trajectory. I think the United States will collapse eventually. I don't know
okay.
if it'll become a
That's not what I'm talking about here.
Okay, well, that's what I'm talking
Well,
about.
I'm not
'cause that was
talking
my
about-
point was
I'm
the
not
point you're
talking
addressing.
And
about-
that's kind of like what I've
I'm
been
not
saying.
talking. I'm not talking about a cult.
I don't care
I'm not
about
talking about a cultural reformation. What I'm talking about is weeding out. What I'm talking about is weeding out those in the church who are not really of the church.
We're not allowed.
Yeah,
What do
but
you?
I
I mean,
think
we can't. We
persecution will
can't.
do
We
that.
can't. We can't. Huh?
I think
Persecution will
I
do
think
that.
persecution will do that.
Yeah,
We
persecution
can't just
does
sit
that.
around on our behinds and wait for persecution
Well,
to come. That's not
Hey,
excusable.
we're not waiting for it. We're doing a podcast.
Yeah, and see,
We're not waiting.
You see, what do you want to do?
I am having children and baptizing
Yeah,
the name in
right.
the Trinity, and I am involved in my church,
Building
and
houses.
doing
What do I
wanna do?
podcast and trying to tell people, warn people of their pending doom.
And-
we are doing what we need to do.
Yeah.
but that's not the issue. But that doesn't nullify my point that I don't think it's going to reverse our current trajectory. I don't think we're going.
It
off
doesn't
course.
matter.
Yeah,
It
I don't
doesn't.
think we're
That's
changing course.
irrelevant.
That's all my point was. All I was saying was I don't think our trajectory is going to change. That doesn't mean that we don't do anything. We don't try to seek unity. In fact, we need to be crying out to true Christians in any denomination to get out if you're in
Yeah.
a corrupt church and start
Yeah.
networking with Christians who are sincere in their faith and be ready for hard times because they're coming. Whether it's a civil war or it's an underground church that's under constant persecution from a superstate, no matter what, it's not going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's going to be some rough times. And the church needs to prepare for that. It needs to prepare for that by rallying around orthodoxy and around Christian communities who practice what they preach.
and I believe, I agree with
And
that.
that's basically what I'm talking about. Is
But see, the thing
being
is
unified.
that the thing is that if I'm saying I believe that Trump will win, I believe that because I think the evidence is already out
Yes,
there.
I made a note of that. I want to know
Yeah.
if we could bet a bottle of whiskey on that because I'm
No, I'm okay.
and I'm
not?
saying
Why
I'm
not?
saying it's
Well, we
I
might.
thought-
We'll
it'd be
talk
fun.
about.
It'd
We'll
be
talk
fun.
about that.
You
yeah.
say you say you'll.
I'll-
I'll say I look. I have a. I mean, it's possible that Trump will win too. I think Biden is going to be the one who ends up being in office.
But let me
and let's say
finish
you
my
are.
point. You're sticking too much
But I'm
on
saying
the I
it's
think Trump is
irrelevant.
going to win.
I'm
Okay.
saying
Okay.
I'm
The
saying
thing
it's
is-
irrelevant.
Let me finish my statement.
Okay, go ahead. Let me finish.
Okay.
Okay.
The thing is that I think Trump is going to win, but if he doesn't, I fully acknowledge the fact that the apparatus is in place to keep him from winning.
Yeah.
If he doesn't. Go
If
ahead.
he doesn't,
Yeah.
then we're going to have problems.
Okay.
Yeah.
The
And
church,
that's what I wrote. Yeah, I wrote
the
that. I
church is going to be in trouble,
Immediate trouble.
immediate
Yeah.
trouble.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that I saw on the thing today, there's executive orders coming down the pike right after his inaugurations.
I believe
that
it.
is going to have an immediate effect on the church.
I believe it. Yeah.
Immediate effect.
I believe it. Mhm.
Well, a mandatory
Yeah.
lockdown would,
Yeah.
of course,
Yeah.
be that
Yeah.
because they would
a mandatory
include the church.
lockdown.
Yeah.
Are you going to be able to obey a mandatory lockdown?
Yeah.
Well, we're
Okay.
just not going to.
No.
We're not going to.
No, we're not. We're
We
just
can't.
not going to.
We
Yes.
can't. You know, so
Yes.
so that's what I'm saying. We are when you and this whole thing about the state. That's what I don't care what the state has to say. I don't care what they're doing. The thing is that they're not going to tell me
But I'm not saying you should care
How to run my life.
I'm not saying you should care. I'm just saying that you need to understand. We need to understand. Okay, and this is not just speaking to you, but this is also
Okay,
speaking to those who are listening. We need to understand that these people are unified in their. We can call it absurdity. We can call it
Perversion.
irrationality. We can call it perversion. We can call it morality. Whatever you want to call it. These people are unified. Okay, they have a plan.
And we're
Okay?
not.
And we're not. And we need
but
to
we
be,
will
is the
be when the
point.
persecution starts. We will be.
Don't-
I'm sure.
uh,
Yeah,
Okay.
but we're trying to
Unless
get
we
ahead
have
of
a
that.
plan, don't
We're
count
trying-
on
We're
it.
trying to get ahead of that train, though, and simply
Unless we have
say,
a plan, don't
this
count
is what
on
you
it.
need to do. This was a book.
Okay.
The book I've been reading by Rod Dreher, "Live Not by Lies." It's a manual for Christian dissidents, and he's basically giving Americans advice from former from Christians who were persecuted under the former Soviet Union. And Kolakovic was a Catholic priest.
Oh,
in
that was, I
Slovakia.
heard about that book. That was about the Catholic priest in Russia. Is that right?
Well, no. This book is an American journalist, but he includes writings from Orthodox, Protestant, Catholic, whatever, all sorts of people who lived under the Soviet Union. There's a whole group of people he references.
Okay,
but
so
he's
what's the name of that book
It's
again?
called Live Not by Lies.
Live Not
It's actually
by
a pretty brand new. It came out in the New York Times bestseller list, I think. But he's basically, what the guy is saying is that Christians are going to be in for persecution under a soft totalitarianism that's coming through
Yeah.
the combination, the congruence of
Yeah.
social media,
Yeah.
big tech,
Yeah.
surveillance, the current state,
Yeah.
medical tyranny. All of these groups are going to coalesce into a soft totalitarianism that will suppress Christian speech, which it already has. And look,
Live Not by Lies, a manual for Christian dissidents.
oh yeah, no, it's real good.
Okay, I'm gonna
but
order it
Kolakovic saw what was going on with the communists ahead of time, and he basically started doing Bible studies, meeting in secret, teaching people how they need to speak when they're questioned by
Exactly.
authorities, like how we're going to organize these things, how to help Christians,
Yes.
young Christians find spouses, how
Yes.
to help them raise their children when it might be what if we have a one-child policy? First of all, given the current Protestant church's view of contraception, I think a lot of Christians would probably tolerate a one-child policy. And the reason they would tolerate it is because they were only planning on having two anyway, so what's one less? So the whole attitude of the church is so bad that this is why, and I'm not disagreeing with you, John Michael, per se, but I do think persecution is going to be one of the principal unifying factors, because I think part of the reason the church does not have unity is because there is a blatant toleration of wickedness, and it's going to come down to God being our vindicator and bringing judgment upon.
I have that
the
book
I will
in
say
my
this:
apostates.
if persecution does anything, it will simply weed out those who are real Christians from those who are not.
Which is what's going to bring the unity.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
Which is what's going to bring the unity.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
Because that is the
if
issue.
anybody knows what they're doing.
Because right now the unity isn't denominational, because the same division we're discussing, this disunity, things
Yeah.
on like the vax, these examples I'm using that the government's going to be coming at us with, like the vax mandate.
Yeah.
Those divisions are every denomination.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you're an LCMS, doesn't matter if you're in the PCA or the RPCNA. It
Correct.
doesn't matter. Or the Southern Baptist Convention. Within every single one of those denominations, the congregants are going to be divided on issues like a vaccine mandate, on whether it's right or wrong.
Agreed.
That's the problem. Is
Agreed.
what we're talking about. That's
Agreed.
the problem.
Yeah.
And that's what needs to be addressed.
Agreed.
So we're talking about unity from a
Yeah.
conceptual perspective, not from unity that is provided by persecution, but unity in what we should believe. We need to be giving proofs as to why there shouldn't be disunity on this issue, why Christians cannot be okay with a vaccine mandate,
Can I
and
ask a
why they
question?
cannot tolerate their neighbors.
And it's got to
being
start in a local
forced.
church.
Can I-
It's
can
got
I-
to start in the local
Can
church.
I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead.
I just out of curiosity, I think I've given you my reason why you should not submit to a vaccine mandate, and my reason is simply this: that I trust in God, not science. Now, what would be your reason for not?
Well, that would be. I would definitely. That'd be my.
Well, we
route.
can
That
get
would
into
be-
that later,
Well, no,
but-
that would be.
No,
my,
I wanna know.
Well, no,
All
that
right,
would
all
be-
right, go ahead,
That
all
would
right.
be my
Off
root.
the top of your head.
Actually, that would be my root metaphysical answer to any of that. I mean, the philosophic and religious exemptions to vaccines are the primary ones that I respond to,
Yeah.
or use for my. For the exceptions I've taken from my own family. I make exception for philosophical and for religious reasons. Now, that being said, okay, I agree with that answer. But I would also say further than that is that for my body, okay, I do believe there's a biblical doctrine of bodily autonomy in the sense that we are made in the image of God, okay, and we are called, okay, as individuals
Yeah.
to respond to God's law. Now, because of our sin, we cannot. We violate God's law, and we cannot respond apart from God working in us by grace to produce faith that we may walk in his ways. We can't do that apart from God working in us. But at the bottom line is that we are an agent. We have a right to our life, our property, and no group or person can coerce us against that. That's why for mandatory vaccination, I prefer the term medical rape. I think that's a better term. I think that's more accurate to what's going on, and I think that drives it home because it's against consent. Okay, you did not consent. This is the issue with passive consent. We've talked about, we got into a big discussion about it, why I'm opposed to implicit consent. I don't think by voting or paying taxes or participating in the United States system, you are consenting to anything. Just like if a conservative in Appalachia votes for Trump, that doesn't mean he's consenting to the idea that Trump is going to really be able to reform the system.
No.
You vote because of self-defense.
Right.
Okay, so that doesn't mean you consented to the system. That means that you've been given an option to protect yourself by voting, and you've taken advantage of it. And taxes, once again, not implicit consent, because you're paying taxes because the government says you have to pay taxes, or there'll be some kind of
And
repercussions
that
for
was
you.
my point, though, when I said about Trump. People didn't vote for Trump because they thought he was going to come in and he was going to make massive changes, and we're looking for the United States to be reformed, or or whatever. The people voted for Trump because they sensed danger. They sensed the government was making a move against them.
Yeah, they felt under threat.
They felt under threat.
Yes, and with the vaccine mandate, if you understand it as medical rape, now reframe the question. Okay, well, this is why I'm against the vaccine mandate. What's your reason? I would say, okay, better way of saying it is, this is why I'm against medical rape. Now, why would you be against a kind of rape? Well, why would I be against any kind of rape? Because it is a coercive violation of your consent to an action. They're basically saying, I can do things with your body without you approving it.
Okay, well, that's a
and
good-
I would
that's
say,
a good- I
would say
like
there's
that.
no, and I would say there's no biblical justification for that under any
Well, it's the same way
circumstances.
it's the same reason that we should be against anything mandated.
I would agree.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
But I can agree with your explanation there that you gave. That's a good explanation. That's well reasoned and thought out. But I happen to think that mine is just as good.
Oh no!
And-
Well, once
and
again,
that's-
I would say
Well,
yours
okay,
is
okay.
more foundational. In
That's-
fact, no.
Well,
I
yeah.
would, yours
Yours
would be,
is good, too.
Yours is
Yeah.
once again.
There's
the
there's no.
the three pillars of paganism. No. The three pillars of paganism, right?
Science.
I don't have to get into
Scientific
argument on this
naturalism.
one.
No.
Okay.
Science. No, we're not going to argue because I agree with them.
Okay,
I
okay.
agree with them.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but that's the whole thing, though, is
Yeah.
that when we talk about these issues,
Yeah.
this is issues that are dividing all the different churches. And so we take these propositions, okay? We address, let's say, if we refute scientific naturalism, okay, including subcategories, let's say germ theory of disease, like, because you can actually have a good criticism of germ theory of disease in light of what's called terrain theory, which is that basically what's really a greater indication of whether or not you're going to have a disease is not the presence of germs or pathogens, but on the state of your immune system in your environment. Okay, your environmental context and your immune system. That's a greater indicator of whether or not you're actually going to have a disease. Now, like, there's so many different ways you could come at these issues, but the point is that biblically speaking, scientific naturalism is a different religion. Christians shouldn't engage in it. So if you're not going to submit to the premises of scientific naturalism, you're not going to accept the underlying arguments for a mandatory vaccine
Right.
anyway.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's already
Yeah.
precluded.
And that's the more foundational issue.
Which, and
Yeah,
also
which-
further, you would, if you don't believe in the social contract and you don't believe implicit
Yeah.
consent, that also undermines a vaccine mandate, because the legitimacy of a vaccine mandate is predicated on the fact that you are a citizen, and by being a citizen, you are subject to the state's edicts. Whereas we would say that we are not a social animal, part of a social contract. I never consented to this government to begin with. This is my property. I have a right to live here given by God, not by the United States. The United States doesn't have a right to tell me to do anything mandatory. So if you don't believe in scientific naturalism, that pillar, you don't believe in a vaccine mandate. If you don't believe in the social contract, you don't believe in a vaccine mandate. And guess what? If you believe in the inherent value of human life, right, to the point where you wouldn't sacrifice your own children, you would also be against the vaccine mandate, because
Yeah.
you know the value of human life is such that we are not lab rats, okay, to be injected without any consent.
And back to what you were saying now, you ask why a building permit? A building permit doesn't violate any of those things.
I would disagree, but
It doesn't. Well, it might. Okay, you can find. I don't know. Maybe you have a. I'll give you whatever you might have thought out. That's fine. But you see, the thing is that as far as all three pillars
back
of
to the building permit. Back to the building permit.
no, all three of those things don't come under fire with
my.
a building permit.
Okay.
I mean, and that's what I'm saying is I'm not disagreeing with you for believing
Okay, let's-
what you believe about building permits. What I'm saying is that there's that's the reason for me. I don't see that as being an immediate danger.
Yeah, the reason it doesn't seem immediate danger is because we are, as Christians, to believe in standards, right? Because under God's law, there was a requirement for the parapet, for instance. If you had a second floor that was flat that you would entertain guests, God would have you put fencing around your second story on that second floor. It was in the law. It was a regulation, a building regulation in God's law, okay? So obviously there is a biblical basis for how you are to construct homes. You're supposed to construct things safety with other people's safety in mind. Okay, love your neighbor as yourself, right? You wouldn't want your kids
and I'm going
playing.
to ask you this.
Sure.
When the government asks you to get a building permit, you say that in the law, in the Old Testament, it was required that your building that you were the dwelling that you were building was safe. Okay.
Correct.
So the government acting as an agent of God, why can't the government?
But that law preceded the monarchy, though. That law preceded the monarchy. Before the monarchy, though, that's not how. There wasn't a state that would enforce building permits like that. That's not how it worked. And it was enforced through voluntary covenants. Okay. Mediated by the church, which would be the judges, okay, during that time. It was not mediated by a state coming in with the sword saying, hey, you don't have your permits up, and if you don't follow it, we're going to give you the sword. That's not how it functioned. It's like saying, okay, well, we believe
I'm not
marriage is
I want to understand what.
I'll give you another analogy. We believe that marriage.
I don't understand.
Okay,
what you're
here's another
saying.
analogy. We believe that marriage is between man and a woman, right? And biblically, that would be found in the law of God, right?
Right.
Okay, but that's like also saying that because that is true, it is also follows from that it's perfectly legitimate for a government to issue marriage licenses. Which I wouldn't say that follows at all. Just because marriage biblically under the law is to be between one man and one woman and violations of that are to be enforced with punishments, that doesn't legitimize a government coming in saying that you have to have a marriage license. Similarly, just because we believe under God's law that we have to, let's say, build things safely does not give the government a legitimacy to then enforce building codes and building permits. In fact, building codes and building permits are actually relatively new. We believe that we should build things safely for pretty much all of human history.
Let me ask
but
you
we
another
didn't
question.
need a nanny
then.
state telling
Let
us
me
how
ask
to do
you a
it.
question.
Okay, we're
take me over.
kind of going down a rabbit trail here.
We
but
are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Sure.
Yeah.
We need to do this. The thing is that let's look at marriage. Okay, you take
sure.
it. And I'm not saying I disagree with what you're saying here. I'm not putting you
Sure.
on trial. I'm
Go
just
ahead.
asking
No,
you.
that's fine.
I
don't
want to
mind.
know.
I like being questioned. Go ahead.
I want to know where your thinking leads you in this regard.
Yes.
Okay. Marriage.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I don't believe in marriage licenses either, so you can put me in that category too.
Okay. Well, let's address it. Go ahead.
I'm not saying whether I believe in them or not. I'm just saying I think there's a difference between building permits and marriage. Okay. The thing is that let me ask you this question: should the government, which I believe it should the government make it illegal for there to be divorce except under extraordinary circumstances?
The government doesn't need to. The church has
No.
already prohibited it.
Yeah, the church is already. It's
church is
But
already
isn't it? But let me ask. But see, the thing is that remember, the government is God's left-handed
Correct.
kingdom. That they're bound to enforce the law of God.
But the
why
government-
would the government
Whoa.
not have a problem?
No,
Why
no,
would
no, no.
would there be a problem with the government saying you can't get a divorce unless it's under extraordinary circumstances because the church says so?
Okay.
What
Once
would be the
again,
problem
no.
with
We do want the church to speak to the government and tell the government like what's the appropriate use of God's law, but that's not the problem that we're discussing. We're discussing two separate issues.
Okay.
Whether or not the monarchy was to obey God's law is different from whether or not the monarchy should have come into existence to have a king like the nations, right? They're two separate issues. No one denies that the kings of Israel were supposed to obey God's law. It's pretty clear. But the fact that they had a king to begin with was not instructed by God's law or authorized. Rather, it was to have a king like a nations was a grievous sin. Okay, what Israel did was sin. It was evil to try to have a king like the nations. They wanted to do what the pagans were doing. So what we're talking about here, you're saying your question is basically this, is like, okay, well, shouldn't we want the monarchs enforcing God's law? Okay, that's the same question. And I'm talking from a 1 Samuel 8 chapter saying like, well, why do we need a monarchy to begin with? We're not disagreeing on God's law and its enforcement. We're disagreeing on the mechanism. So yeah, I believe we should have building codes. I believe that we should have marriages. I don't believe that the state is to be the principal arbiter of either.
well,
The
also
state as we have it is a pagan invention.
boy. Also, this also though the state you have to distinguish between the way in which the church enforces the law and the church deals with the law of God and the state deals with the law of God. If
Well,
there
there's
is
more than two
said
categories
state.
though. There's a more. Let's do it from the two kingdoms perspective.
Yeah.
The church versus legitimate
Yeah.
authority. Legitimate authority is any authority that comes from God. Okay, so this could be Nebuchadnezzar, it could be Nero, it could be any of these groups that are even whether they're lawful or lawless.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is what they were for is to be ministers of God providentially, to restrain evil on the earth for the
Yeah.
benefit of the elect. It's simple
Yeah.
as that. So Nero was under obligation to God whether he knew it or not. He is supposed to be a servant of God for the good of the elect. That's what he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be a servant of God, punishing evil according to God's law and aiding the spread of the gospel. That's what Nero and Nebuchadnezzar and all of them, that was what they were supposed to do. Okay? And that's what every king of Israel was held to, that same standard. Did they bring down the idols in the high places, right? That's where it ends every time when they talk about the end of a king, right? They say, he did or did not bring down the idols in the high places. He did or did not restore
Yeah.
the true worship. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
God requires that of any governing authority, but the type of governance that he himself has implemented is not monarchy, is not democracy, is not republicanism, is not socialism, is not any of those things. Rather,
Agreed.
it is God's law mediated by the church, enforced by the community, typically in a patriarchal manner. Men over their own families. Judah wanting to put Tamar to death for committing adultery, right? Tamar was going to be put to death by Judah. Okay? That's not a government. That's not a state in that sense.
we got to move on. But the thing is,
two kingdoms, though.
But the thing is that you're talking about the church and you're talking about the government. You're talking about the left-handed and right-handed kingdom. The thing is that the government isn't, and this goes back to what we said at the beginning, and I think this is relevant. The government is for Christians.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sorry. The church is for Christians.
Okay.
The government is for unbelievers. Okay. The thing is that when you're talking about what you're talking about, okay, Christians don't need building permits and they don't need that kind of stuff to build safely.
Exactly.
But see, the thing is that doesn't the government have a responsibility to make sure that unbelievers build safely?
Okay, so maybe what? So I should give him my baptism certificate and I would get an exception?
Huh? I'm not talking about you.
I'm saying, should I?
I'm not talking about
I'm
you.
saying, given that argument, should, if it was a legitimate moral government that was obeying God's law, if that was the case.
Okay, but
should
I want to get to that though. What you're saying then is, okay, would one step at a time though? Would you agree with me? Can I finish?
Go ahead.
Would you agree with me that the government has a responsibility to make sure that unbelievers follow the law? That they follow it. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about unbelievers.
I think all governments are to punish unrighteousness with the sword.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So what you're saying then, in effect, is that in this particular situation, in this particular day, our government doesn't have the right to be asking for you to get building permits and stuff like that because it's pagan.
Yeah, well, I would say
Pagan.
building codes in
It
general
is
are
not a
pagan.
legitimate government.
Yes. Well, of
That's what
course.
you're saying.
Yeah, I don't think,
Okay.
yes. But once again, even governments that are evil, like Nero, can still be used by God providentially.
Oh, I'm not arguing with that. But
Like I said, every time the United States government, let's say the United States government murdered all Christian children as a matter of practice, okay?
Right.
Okay, the most illegitimate form of government we can think of, right? One that would just be so heinous in its actions. But the moment that it does something approximating God's law, let's say forbidding adultery, it's doing something in accordance with the law, and we would have to say in that specific area it is doing good. But that doesn't really tell us a whole lot, does it? It doesn't tell us a whole lot about the government, the degree of its legitimacy, its moral status, our responsibility. If the Soviets punished adultery, that doesn't really tell us much of anything about their government other than that they're just functioning as a government in some way of maintaining the civil peace, because that's how God has providentially ordained it, that because of sin, men will rule over other men, And that is how things have to be punished, because men left to their own devices are going to be unruly. The only group that's an exception to this that doesn't need a king like the nations is the church, right? Which is why they called it king like the nations, because Christians don't need a state. They don't need a state. They don't need a government. No. We're in agreement. But going back to building codes is important, though, on this, because what I am saying on building codes is this, and why I equate it to vaccine mandates, and actually on the points that we talked about, the 3 pillars of paganism, modern building codes, I would apply to the same thing, because the right to property is inferred from the right to life. If you have a right to life, if God has says that you're made in His image, and if your blood is shed, but if you shed another man's blood, right, by your blood shall be shed also, right?
Right.
The command given to Noah. Okay, the basis for the civil law that even came down later in Moses, right? It's that basic predicate of the value of human life being made in the image of God. Now, with that understanding of God's law and its universal and natural nature, you don't need a state to enforce that. But the thing is, if you are made in the image of God and you have that implicit right to life, you also have the right to property, because property is necessary for maintaining your life. If you're not able to go acquire, let's say, an apple or an orange or food to feed yourself, you won't persist in living. In order to live, you have to feed, you have to eat, you have to have drink. So if you scoop water out of a river with your hands, does that water belong to you? If it doesn't belong to you, then you have no right to take it, in which case you wouldn't get drink and you would die. So the idea that you can appropriate property, okay, and that it belongs to you is implicit in the fact that we're made in the image of God. It is inferred necessarily. If you have a right to life because you're made in the image of God, that must mean you have the right to property, because that life could not be sustained otherwise. And further, it also means you have the right to liberty, because you can then pursue that property and use it to provide for your own life as needed, which is why, for instance, as a Christian, and as conservative as I am, being against contraception, I'm absolutely okay with the cannabis being decriminalized and other substances like that, because you should have the right to acquire property to further and protect and provide for your own life. And if certain things like that are of medicinal value to you for the preservation of your own life, then I believe that is directly inferable from the fact that you're made in the image of God. You have an absolute right to that liberty and to your own property. That being the case, what that means is that it is a violation of the 3 pillars for a government to come in to your life arbitrarily with building codes saying you cannot provide for your own life, you cannot live here, you cannot have a home, you cannot have whatever unless you pay us X amount of money and jump through these sort of hoops and through these regulations. Which is why in the 1970s, a single income with his wife staying at home, he only needed 20 grand and he didn't even have to get into debt and he could build his own home. That's impossible today because of building regulations. That is an infringement upon your life being made in the image of God, because the government's coming in saying is that you cannot provide for yourself and your family unless you first pay tribute to us.
Okay, what you're saying, but let me ask you another question just to make sure I understand. The thing is that you would say that the government should not be doing building codes with anyone, whether it be an unbeliever or a believer or anyone. The government has no right to demand that an unbeliever builds their house according to a certain code.
But here's how he would do it. He would say, if you build a house that's unsafe and it causes anybody harm, you are liable for their life.
Okay. All right. Well, there you go. Okay.
Which is all the law
That's
ever
how
taught
you would
anyway.
resolve.
The law ever taught.
Okay.
Like, for instance, I'm against environmental regulations. But if you dumped poop into the creek and it went down into your neighbor's cistern and then he got cholera and died, you would be liable for his life.
Right.
Does that mean I'm in favor of environmental regulations? No. But if you do something intentionally to the environment where it harms someone else, you're liable to his life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
Okay.
Unless it's Joe Biden.
Which was all was meant by those regulations under the law anyway. They're saying, look, the reason you need to have a fence on your rooftop is because you need to protect your neighbor, and if you don't do that, then you're liable for his life. Same thing with a loose axe head. Same thing.
Okay, so the idea that they're charging money for a building permit, a quote unquote building permit,
yes, and enforcing
is immoral.
That. Absolutely.
Okay.
100%.
All right, I just wanted to make sure. Okay, I understand.
Yep, for anybody.
For anybody.
Because everybody should have the absolute right to provide for their own family if they're not harming
And
someone.
if you harm somebody, in your building, then the law is there afterwards to pick up and to make restitution.
Yep.
Okay. All right,
Absolutely. That's all we need is God's word.
Okay, let's move
It's
on
sufficient.
let's move from building permits into theology.
Oh boy.
If we have enough time, I mean,
oh boy.
I almost feel like we should stop there.
No, I think
Unless
let's take one area.
Uh,
Let's take one area. What do
to
you-
one area. I don't think. I don't know. You're talking about one
I
area.
think,
and-
I think the conversation is pretty good. I mean, to be honest, I
Uh-huh.
think everything we've been discussing is pretty good.
yeah. Yeah.
But
I mean, you're talking about, you're talking about what the government is and isn't able to do. And I would just say, one last thing I was going to bring up is if you look at the early church, they did take advantage, even though they may have seen the government as being unlawful, wrong. They did take advantage of rights they were granted to that the government gave to them. For instance, Paul was a Roman citizen,
Correct.
and when he was in Philippi, right, and they put him in prison unlawfully
yes.
because he brought a demon out of a girl, and then people said, "Well, you're taking our business away from us," because she was able to give people their fortunes and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And even though God, while they were in the prison, God worked a miracle and broke the walls down. Okay, and they came out. Even though they could have left, they didn't. And the reason Paul didn't is because he said, "I'm a Roman citizen, and I want to, I want you to recognize the rights that I have under your government."
Yes, which I think that's perfectly fair. I gave the example
yeah.
of voting. So even if you thought that because of the social contract being inherently wrong
Yeah.
from the founding of this country,
Yeah.
that Trump would be impossible for Trump to reform the system properly because basically if Trump were to solve the problems we're discussing, he would have to abolish
Yeah.
the United States, right? And that's obviously
Yeah.
not what you're voting for a president to do. So why would I vote for Trump given those premises for self-defense?
Correct.
Okay, so
Correct.
what was Paul doing? Paul, I think,
Yeah.
once again, acting in self-defense.
Yeah.
He has certain rights, being born in Tarsus, right,
Yeah.
which was a Roman colony. Okay, though.
No,
Jew,
wait a
the tribe of
second. Wait a
Benjamin-
second.
Whoa.
Hold on. Yeah, Paul was. I like the biblical terminology for it, and I'm not going to say that you're disagreeing with this. I'm just saying that I think
sure.
it's good terminology, and this is based upon again. This isn't an aberration of any sort. This is the two kingdoms in operation.
Yeah,
Paul appealed to Caesar,
of course.
and that's what he did.
Yeah.
He appealed
Well,
to Caesar
as was his right.
because that's it. As was his right to do.
Sure, I would.
That's
appeal to my right to
exactly
vote.
what's-
Yeah,
what's
I'm
the
appealing-
point?
I'm appealing. to
That's the point.
Yes,
That's
what-
the point.
We're not
It
disagreeing
was-
then.
That's
Yeah,
exactly
yeah.
what we're saying, though.
Yeah,
But earlier,
but I wasn't given a disagreement point here.
Oh, okay.
I was just talking to Josh
Oh,
about.
okay.
He was
All right.
saying the things that he was saying, and I thought that
Yeah.
it was best summed up
Uh-huh.
in appealing to Caesar. There is a legitimate reason for a Christian to appeal to Caesar.
Well, sure, but I would say
didn't have
but
to, though.
The reason Paul did what he
Well, he
did was,
did, I mean.
yeah, but the reason Paul did was because he was a Roman citizen.
That's
and
right.
Citizenship could be
And
used to his
yes,
advantage in that situation.
His citizenship gave him more standing and more rights under that society than if he didn't have a citizenship.
You're right. Which is what I'm saying. So I'll give an analog. Let's do an
He
analog.
could appeal to Caesar. If you weren't a citizen, you couldn't appeal to anyone.
But that's my point. Yeah, he could appeal to Caesar because he had a right to.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. He had a right given the Roman
And-
system with the Roman system. That's like
Right.
I have a right to vote. But once again, I can be opposed to the United States government and still use those benefits and privileges it has given to me.
You
to
can
my
appeal to
personal
the
advantage.
United States.
Yeah, I can appeal
Yeah.
to the Constitution.
Yeah,
what
you can
they
appeal
say.
to the
And what
Constitution.
they say about me,
Yeah.
they say I have a right to vote. I have
Yeah.
a right to my property. Supposedly, and so they say I have these certain rights, and yeah, I can use them to my own advantage. But once again, that is not an endorsement of that system.
No.
All that is
You're recognizing what
Okay,
it says
okay.
in Romans chapter
But,
what is
all
it
right.
13.
All right,
that
we're kinda
God-
getting
God
off
has,
of-
God has given. No, this is kind of
Where
like
I wanted
theology.
to go. Okay,
the
go
thing,
ahead.
The thing is that God has given government the power to enforce the sword. I mean, the thing is
yeah,
that
they're diakonos. They are a servant of
They're
God.
a servant
for
of
your
God
good.
for your
Correct.
good. Yeah,
Correct.
and you're allowed to utilize the government whenever you can
Yes.
utilize them for your good.
Yes,
sure.
and our government gives us the right
Christians
to
can
form.
participate in government. I think
Okay.
Christians can participate in government for the
Right.
same reason.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
our government gives the point here being our government gives us, yes, the right to vote, the right to certain freedoms, but our government also gives us the right to form a militia.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
The second, as we see, as you read in the Second Amendment,
Okay.
a well-regulated militia being necessary to security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Okay, now, but here's my objection to that. Okay, with the way you're using it in the context with discussing Paul and Philippi. Okay, here's what my objection would be. Okay, so if you were to just organize a group, okay, like what the founders meant by that in the Constitution would be not how it's practiced today, right? Because how it's understood today, unfortunately, by most states when they talk about a well-regulated militia, they view that as a national guard that's held up by the individual states. Okay, they believe that is the militia of the state. So the Pennsylvania militia is the national guard.
Well, that's not obvious. That's not what's meant
that's
by
true.
the founding
That's true.
fathers.
I agree. But
Yeah.
when Paul was appealing to that Roman statute in Philippi,
Yeah.
it was understood by those who were listening to them to be the established understanding of that precept. So when he says, I'm a Roman citizen, you can't do X, Y, and Z kind of stuff, right? That was something that even the jailer would agree with. But if you were to say to, let's say, the local judge for the district court, hey, I started this militia because look at my constitutional right. No judge around here or anywhere, even as conservative as this area is going to say, oh, well, yeah, that's what we all agree on that's something you're allowed to do. They don't even agree with that anymore. They're not going to understand that that's what your right means by that.
Well, they don't have to.
Because of, yes, but you couldn't use that to your advantage in the way that Paul used what he did to his advantage. Because then the people that were listening to Paul acknowledged it, whereas the people you would be talking to wouldn't acknowledge that that's what that means for today. They wouldn't acknowledge it. When they say that you have the right to, let's say the right to bear arms, you could come in with a minigun like Arnold Schwarzenegger in T2, right? You could have a minigun under the Constitution.
Yeah.
But try passing that with the judge. He's not going to say, oh, yeah, you know what? You are an American citizen, and I recognize your minigun. He's not going to do that. He's going to say, well, given precedent, legal precedent over the last 100 years, you can't have a minigun.
Sure. Well, it depends. It depends what state you're in, though.
You can't have a minigun unless you have a very expensive permit for automatic weapons, and it has to be made before 1986. That's the law.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. But I mean,
automatic
but you
minigun?
don't have to have.
You ever seen the gun in Terminator in the movie? Have you seen the movie Predator?
Yeah.
Okay, remember Jesse Ventura, that big gun he took out of the bag, old painless?
Oh, okay.
That's a minigun.
That's a minigun. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome in it.
How did you know that, being as young as you are, and I didn't know that?
Those are like some of my favorite movies.
Oh, okay.
I like Arnold.
Now, one thing that I do want to say, and I just want to make sure I get this point
We're
across.
talking about okay. Go
I
ahead.
want to make
ahead.
sure I get this point across because I want to make sure you guys haven't bought into this.
Uh-oh.
The right to own a firearm is completely unrelated to a well-regulated militia, right? You believe that, right? I mean, the thing is that you don't have the right to bear an arm is not predicated upon whether or not you're a part of a militia.
No.
Okay.
No.
That's
That's not what it says.
I know. There's a comment.
That's not what the That's
There's
not
a
what
comment in
the
there.
Second Amendment
A
says.
well-regulated militia.
Yeah.
Stop.
Yeah. But you're talking. Here's the point I'm making. And this is something you said. A while ago, quite some time when we were having our whole discussion about unity. You're talking about, you're not going to listen to the government if they get this radical. If they come and try to tell you need to have this vaccination, you're going to be ready with a gun.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what I'm saying is, what I would say to that is, my first response to that would be, why would you think that you as an individual are going to be able to stand up against the whole government? And my second response to that would be, why not join together, given the right that our Constitution gives us, and why not join together with others of like mind if the government gets to that radical position, join together with others of like mind.
I don't have a problem with joining with anybody.
Okay.
I don't have a problem with that.
All right.
And as far as your first question is concerned, immediately, if I don't know that there's anybody out there to join with,
Your response is still
I'm
the
gonna-
same.
I'm
You're
gonna-
not gonna resist.
I'm gonna die.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
But you,
That's
but
it.
you know, and that's the point that I
I
was
don't think I'm
making,
going to win anything.
that the
John
ultimate,
Michael.
well, the ultimate point, but the ultimate point that I was making is that we need to be unified. We need to take as many rights as we're granted. We need to grab hold of them, not just from the Bible, but also any rights that our current form of government gives us. We need to take them and take them to the bank and fully utilize them.
Use them to our
Not
advantage.
just take, let's just not take for granted that our government is going to give us rights and
I don't-
hand
yeah,
and come
I-
to
I
us and
never-
hand them to us and hand them in our lap and say, here you go. We
Yeah.
have to take out. We have to go out and we have to take it.
Yeah, we have to take advantage of those things that they're still claiming that they're allowing us to have and use
John
them
Michael,
to our benefit.
and Josh too, our Constitution does not say that our rights come from the government.
No, they come from God.
They come from God.
Yeah.
That's where our rights come from.
But see, the state doesn't believe that anymore, though.
Well, again, I'm going to give you my canned response. I don't care what they think.
Yeah.
Well, they don't say. Yeah,
I
they.
don't care what
yeah,
they
the
think.
Constitution does say that our rights come from God.
Yes.
but then it also goes on to say what those rights are.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
they hold
kind
the
of double
contradictory-
standard.
Well, they have. Well, yeah, and they have they enumerate the rights. Okay, but there's the contradictory
They're
premises.
they're pretty all encompassing. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think those would just about cover the gamut.
Yeah, and pursuit of happiness is actually Thomas Jefferson's way of reformulating the word property so there was no confusion. But he meant life, liberty, and property. And regarding those 3 points, now the contradiction in the Declaration is simply this: is that it is basically the right of the people to institute their own form of government, and that also you have these other rights, life, liberty, and property, that come from God. Okay, so the right of the people to institute their own form of government. Okay, the idea that government comes from man and that man can form it of his own ability and volition, and then at the same time that there's these rights that come from God, and yet this thing that comes from man is supposed to enforce these things that come from God. And that's really where I think you get the disjunction, is where you have the social contract. This is where the founding fathers were kind of like schizophrenic, because the Christian influence is to say, okay, well, we have to acknowledge that the rights come from God, because otherwise there is no basis, there's no metaphysical or moral basis for prohibiting the government from just taking
from
what
doing
it wants.
whatever it wants to do.
Correct. So we have to at least acknowledge that they're transcendent, right? These rights come from God, they don't come from man.
Yeah.
But they also wanted to have their cake and eat it too, because they also wanted to acknowledge a social contract, not a divine institution of government that would kind of be compatible with divine rights.
Yeah.
Right? We have rights that come from God, but we don't have a government that comes from God.
a government formed by
Rather,
the people.
we have a government that comes from man, and we have rights that come from God. That was an oil and water mixture, and they didn't realize that. And the one was going to consume the other. And what we saw was, per usual, it is the corrupt thing that ends up consuming, right? So the idea that rights come from God, because there's no system ordained by God to basically enforce that, and you left it up to the will of man, the God part's been ignored now. As far as the United States government is concerned, your life, liberty, and property comes from the state. And if they didn't believe that, if they actually believed it came from God, going back to building permits, they wouldn't try to regulate your life, liberty, and property if they believed it was truly given to you by God, because they wouldn't have the right to. They wouldn't have the right to interfere, regulate, circumvent anything that came from God to you, because it would be not their domain. They can't tell you, like, okay, yeah, God gave you the right to life, but if you're over 40, you have to be mandatorily sterilized and then put to death. So we acknowledge you got the right to life, except in cases A, B, and C, right? Yeah. Let me just check, they're still there. But you have property, right? It's the same thing for God. If God gave you
the shivers, I'm telling you, I
Dude,
don't know
you have
what
no
to
idea.
do.
I just read a story about Russian Christians having their testicles smashed under Soviet boots. Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
It gave me nightmares.
Oh,
But yeah.
how did we get off on this tangent?
I don't know.
Uh,
Abrasive examples.
Josh brought it up.
By Mr.
Were you
Johnson, of
thinking
course.
about though? Were you thinking about I don't know, like a month ago, where we had to,
What? What?
Those poor pigs,
Oh,
piglets.
castrating pigs.
We had to castrate those poor pigs.
It's a very hard job to do. I don't want to talk about it. I'm
there
still
you go.
traumatized. My hands shake when I think about it.
Any
Anyway.
guy would be. Anyway, what were you saying?
But
Go
my
back.
point is that if the right came from God, the state can't qualify it either. It's not only can they not violate it, but they can't qualify it either. If God is the one who gave you the right to life, the government can't then come in and then define that life. Okay, so I have the right to life given to me by God. Government comes in and says, okay, yeah, God gave you life, but over a certain age, you should be euthanized. Or, well, if you're 7.5 months along in gestation, that's also an exception. And you know what I mean? Like, this is what they do. Property works it's the same principle. If property or the pursuit of happiness is a right given by God, then how can they come in and say that, well, this is what you can do with your property? Yeah, you have the right to property, but with your property, you can't really build a house on this property. What you can do is you can park your car here if you want and maybe sleep in it, but with our zoning here, we don't think that you can actually use it for anything that would sustain your life. Or, yeah, you have the right to liberty given to you by God, but you can't buy this, or you can't sell that, or you can't go here, or you can't go there. That's not how that works.
Well, see, the thing is that somewhere along the line, and I think as I listen to you, I think you kind of like got to ask yourself, when does a culture cross the line from being, what do you want to call it, a viable culture? Okay, America was founded. When America was founded, we can agree, I'm sure, that it was founded on there was an attempt to bring Christian values into this population. A lot of the law that we had was out of the Christian, out of the Old Testament. And they tried to set up the country like that, and for the longest time, it kind of worked pretty well. I mean, it worked well enough so that there was peace in the land. I mean, of course, we had the Civil War and stuff like that. But
I do this quote all the time.
My
John
point,
Adams.
my point is that somewhere along the line you have to there has to be a reckoning as to whether or not a country or a culture crosses over from being a viable, God-honoring culture. Can we say that? I don't know. Into pagan, and I think what we've done in the United States, and I think this is the root of a lot of what we've been talking about tonight, about how far the government can go and so on and so forth. I think the reason why we're having this is because we've crossed the line into being a pagan culture.
Well, the moral quality of the people now reflects the sort of government that they instituted. So the United States colonies was a collection of separatists and schismatics and heretics. There was Orthodox people here too, lots of Orthodox people, but people that disagreed. I mean, it's not like Lutherans in the United States were.
No, there was Lutherans, there was Reforms, but the Puritans is the ones.
Yeah,
I'm
there was a lot of
primarily
there was a lot of good Orthodox thinking
people
in America, but there was also a lot of schismatic tendencies. I mean, people in the United States, the Congregationalists, a lot of them became Unitarians by 1800. We actually just talked about this today, Joe Michael.
Yep.
The thing is that America was full of heresy, schism, and bad doctrine from the very beginning, and as well as Enlightenment pagan thought. Because once again, when did this paganism come in? It didn't come in the 1960s.
Yeah.
That was just the blossoming of the seed after it came to full maturity.
But stop there though.
There was a lot of mixture.
There was, as you say, there was a seed that was from the beginning.
Yes.
But there was also a blossoming. And that's what I'm talking about. When you have to reckon with the fact that the United States has blossomed into a full-blown pagan culture.
Yes.
We don't have the same values that we had from the 1776 up until a certain point.
Yes, and I would say that those values were already in decline at that time.
There was a seed of paganism there.
Yes, there was a seed of paganism, but even for instance, historically, Christians were in complete agreement that if you were a witch, you should be stoned to death.
Right.
Okay? There was no disagreement on that.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you were a
That's what
Protestant.
the Bible says.
Luther would put them to death. Calvin would put him to death. We would all agree on that. But in the 1780s, when the Constitution was founded, that was no longer the consensus of Christians in the United States. That was no longer the consensus.
Yeah.
But that was that
that's
seed
one
of
example.
paganism that
That's
you're
part of
talking
it.
about.
But that's just one example. Also, when they formed this country, Christians in this country changed their confessional documents on the civil magistrate to conform to the American idea of government. The Westminster Confession,
Correct.
chapter 23 on the civil magistrate, its understanding of the magistrate is to punish and suppress heresy, false doctrine, blasphemy, witchcraft, like all of that stuff. The government, according to the Westminster Confession of Faith, the confession held to by all Presbyterians,
Okay.
the magistrate is to punish those things. And the magistrate had the right to call church councils just like Constantine did for Nicaea. Okay? But when America was founded, the Presbyterians were so embarrassed of their heritage just 100 years earlier that they went and changed chapter 23 of their confession to omit those sections because those didn't jive with the free exercise clause of the U.S. Constitution.
Yeah.
And if you're a Presbyterian and a good American citizen, you couldn't hold to both at the same time. The only exception to that really was the RPCNA, the Covenanters, the former denomination I was a part of, who fought in the American Revolution, but when the United States did not acknowledge Christ as king and the Westminster Confession as the valid confession, they refused to vote rather than change their confession. They so held that the magistrate was obligated to be subservient to Christ and his law that if America wasn't going to do so, they were not going to participate. Until the 1960s, if you were in the church I was a member of, you weren't able to vote, be a member of work in the post office, or participate in the United States government in any official capacity and be a communicant member of the church. Now, that was consistent, okay? But no one else was consistent that way. We rather just compromise the faith to appeal to our society. And the thing is, that's where it started. Our government is actually, its actions that it took is part of why the church degraded. All the church did was just move out of the way and let it do it. So when the government came up with welfare to take care of the poor, the church should have been like, no, you're not going to do that because we are to do that. Instead, we're like, okay, go ahead. We'll pick up what's left after that, or when it came to taking care of the children who had no fathers, okay, instead of saying, okay, well, that is our job and it's the job of the family, which is how it should have been. Okay, which it was no longer the job of the family after Social Security, but by the time it got to President Johnson, now it was full-blown welfare.
So are you saying then that there's no difference between the seed and the blossoming?
I'm saying that the seed was planted before the country was even founded.
I agree with that.
Okay.
But I mean,
and I'm saying that
my question though was, is there a point where we have to reckon with the fact that the United States has gone full-blown?
Yeah, like when did it go full blown? I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, like I would say, like
when did it go from being a seed into an actual fruit?
Yeah, I would say seed, growth, flower, and then flowers turn into fruit after pollination, right? Let's say that's the normal cycle of a plant. Yeah. Where are we at? Well, I would say the fruit is forming on the branch.
Okay,
and it hasn't dropped to the ground yet, which would be the full cycle, right? Where now it's begetting more evil. Like I think at this point where we're basically a fully pollinated flower and it's starting to bear fruit.
Okay.
And when the fruit is ripe, people,
when do you think that started?
I think
if you want to talk
1930s. I think the 1930s is when it really
20s, 30s
took
pretty bad.
Became
going back to that movie that you told me about. Would you think that it happened when the church started going along with
contraception? That's definitely a big one.
Big one. Okay.
Yeah, that might be.
And that was right around that time period.
That might
be
a
little bit later.
Yeah, that might be when the blossoms formed and the blossoms were pollinated in the 1960s.
When all the mainstream denominations in the church became liberal. That's what I would say.
Yeah, so
that's when we
ceased
to be a Christian nation.
Yeah.
With all the mainstream denominations.
Wouldn't that be, though, when you're talking about the church, that would be another progression of the blossoming or the fruit. I mean,
sure.
The church going corrupt is towards the end of the process.
So I would say it this way. And once again, the church in the United States was very fragmented and schismatic even at the founding. But what I would say is at the beginning of the 20th century, because what did John Adams say? I've made this quote many times, and I think it's important. He said that the Constitution was written for a moral and religious people and is wholly inadequate for any other. Now, when he said that, the basic point that we need to take from this, especially for people that are skeptical of the institution of the state in general, is that a state that is so limited that its borderline non-existent, which is what the founders intended. In fact, I jokingly call them, in a paradoxical manner, anarcho-monarchists. Now, those two terms are contradictory because monarchist means small government, anarchist means no government. Well, they're anarcho-monarchists because the founding fathers actually argued that government is evil, but it's a necessary evil that we should have in the most limited possible amount. Ideally, we would have no government.
And that's what most libertarians believe today.
Do you think that the founding fathers, though, do you think that, did they have any idea of the church in society? That the church would be, it would be their hope that the church would be a counterbalance to government.
Yeah, of course they do. Yeah, because once again, the Constitution being written for more religious people, the point
that's what I mean.
Is that a government that's this limited will only work if the people are moral and religious.
Yeah.
And that would imply the a good, viable church, right?
Yeah, and of course. Yes. And how would that apply to 1 Samuel 8, for instance? What's that mean? We talk about how Christians don't need a government, right? Because we would practice the law of God among ourselves, and we don't need a state to enforce it, right?
Right.
Well, John Adams is saying the same thing. He's saying, like, if you guys are moral and religious, you don't need a government, so you guys can handle this Constitution that's so limited. Any other people, whether it's Muslims or Buddhists, couldn't have an American Constitution because they don't have the moral and religious foundations to allow them to self-govern to the point they don't need a nanny state. But the thing is, once we abandon, and this is where he's very apt in bringing up the dates that he's bringing up in the early 20th century, late 19th century, is during that time is really where you see the actual institutional churches in this country mass apostatize doctrinally. Okay, a perfect example is Princeton. Okay, which was the great schism in Princeton that formed the modern Presbyterian churches. Because historically, Presbyterians, they held to the Westminster Confession. They were orthodox in their theology. Bible's the Word of God, the Holy Trinity, right? Brass tacks. Well, Princeton ended up dividing, right, over this very issue because the new liberalism, with J. Gresham Machen, right, Christianity and liberalism, he's dealing with this, is liberal theology, right? Same liberal theology that led to the divisions.
When did that happen?
1920s.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that goes along with where I think that's where I
Lutheran
think
Church,
I
same
think
thing.
Yeah, I think the turning point was the passage of the Federal Reserve Act. That's where.
Well, it's the same time period.
Yeah,
but it's all coalesced in the same time. Federal income tax.
Because it was the Federal Reserve that put the government over the top.
It's also income tax.
Yeah, income tax.
It was also these liberals that were calling for social change and social justice and things of that kind of language as well.
Yes, but denial of the Trinity, women ministers, like these, and of course, contraception,
radical denial of
contraception. That's
the
all
Bible
1920s,
as God's word.
1930s.
So where America crossed the Rubicon then was
when the churches finally gave up the ghost.
It happened about the first 2 decades of the 20th century.
Yeah. Within my grandma was born in 1926. She's still alive today.
Yeah.
Within her lifetime, we went from a church that would have condemned as equivalent to sodomy and murder, contraception, to a church now that is not only enfeebled, but so enfeebled that it basically endorses Marxist policies without even batting an eye. Yeah. It'll show sympathy with groups like BLM that want the abolition of the nuclear family. In one woman's lifetime, we've seen that. A woman who, and I have great respect for her, who a humble housewife her whole life, whose life was exemplary over anyone I've ever her being a housewife. She was one of my greatest role models. Not like a soldier or a theologian. Like these guys are role models too, but a humble housewife was a huge role model for me because of her steadfastness and her joy in a station that other people would ridicule. And in living that lifestyle, her marriage, like marriages of old times, survived where marriages today don't because they don't practice the old ways. And when I look at her lifetime, right, having only electricity in her second floor, having to go out to an outhouse in her lifetime to what we have today, that shows you the rate of accelerating decline. And so when you look at what he was saying, the decline of the church, when the church gave up the ghost in the early 1900s until now, in that one woman's lifetime, right? That acceleration, it happened because it started with the church's collapse. For the 200 years before that, going back to the revolution, up until the point where the churches mass apostatized, it was a much slower, right? America maintained its limited form of government for much longer. The acceleration really started happening in the Civil War, but then exploded at the beginning of the 20th century.
Correct.
And like you bring up the Federal Reserve Act. It's also, I can't remember which amendment it is, 17th or 4th. but the amendment that basically changed how senators were chosen.
And that one too.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the income tax.
The income
okay.
tax,
So those three, and then of course the New Deal under Roosevelt, and then eventually Johnson's War on Poverty are all elements of that. But the church no longer was that moral bulwark, right?
Right.
That,
Right.
to quote another, right? That counterbalance.
And when the church went over the edge, that led to the deterioration of the family, and it led to the deterioration of government.
Yeah, well, when the church was no longer orthodox and unified in
Yeah.
the orthodox faith,
Yeah.
they basically just let the government do what it wanted. So
Right.
the government had no problem coming in and then just
And then-
replacing the church.
And then doing damage to families.
Yes.
Doing damage
Yep.
to families.
And the church
Yeah.
just let it happen. In fact, the church was willing to change its message to conform with the times. So once again, the kind of families that we have today are a result of government policy. Let's say Social Security and welfare has created the kind of families that we have today. And then you have the church coming in, instead of saying, no, this is wrong, they say, well, do you know what? Single motherhood is really
We should do
another way
this.
of God's design.
Yeah.
Oh, or, men and women both working outside the home, something that the church would have opposed, by the way, for the longest times. In fact, the one guy, actually his name was Meyer. We brought this up before. He was a Lutheran minister. It's like M-A-I-E-R.
Yeah, Meyer. He's big.
Yeah. Well, it was his book on marriage, okay, that actually written in, I think, the late 1930s that condemned contraception still in the LCMS.
Right, he
LCMS was one of the last churches to still condemn contraception as far as Protestant bodies. They held on after Lambeth longer than most did. But like even him, like one of his arguments is like, well, of course it is wrong to promote contraception because that would cause women to be tempted to want to work outside the home and not be properly nurturing their children. How many LCMS ministers would have the balls to say that from the pulpit? Not very many. And the reason they don't have the balls to say that is because the church has conformed to these cultural changes which came from the state. And the reason the church stood out of the way and has been willing to change its message is because it doesn't want to fight Uncle Sam. It doesn't want to stand up to the societal change and the cultural enemies that are there. And that's why I have a very grim outlook for how the church as an institution is going to deal with this emerging persecuting entity of the state. Rather, the unity of the church is going to come from true, sincere Christians from a whole host of denominations coming together around a common orthodox confession. Because our denominations have
needs to
failed.
happen.
The denominations have failed us to maintain orthodoxy and orthopraxy. They failed.
Well, this it kind of goes along with what I think, and the fact is that I don't have any kind of high expectations for the church in the United States, as far as I'm concerned.
As an institution.
As an institution, yeah. The thing is that I believe, well, I've told this to people since I became Lutheran. I think the LCMS is one of the last vestiges of biblical Christianity that exists in the world.
That's why I'm here.
That's why we're, I don't think there's any other game in town. But I'm not saying, don't take me to be saying that, I mean, we have our problems like contraception, birth control. I mean, all that's, we have all those problems, but our documents are how we
Concord,
our
yeah.
Book of Concord, how we proceed, and so on and so forth, is biblical. Is completely biblical.
Liturgy of the historic
historic
church.
liturgy of the church, and so on and so forth. There is no other. Everything else is fallen. The thing is that I'm going to use this as an example, and people are going to call me chauvinist, but wherever you see a woman in the pulpit, you're looking at an apostate church. That's where you're seeing it, just plain and simple. Anytime.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you believe that, John?
I don't have a problem with that because I think that if you are so doctrinally erroneous that you would permit that teaching, I can't respect anything else you would say on any other topic.
I don't believe anything you
Sure.
say. Yeah.
Sure.
I don't have any.
I can.
I don't have any
I can
reason.
buy that.
If you're not going to listen to
I
what
can buy
God
that.
says in that regard,
Yeah.
I don't have anything.
Yeah, to me, it basically means that the church is too stupid to read.
Yeah.
And so I don't go to churches that are illiterate.
Right. Right.
If you believe in women pastors, you're biblically illiterate. You've never read it.
And that would be a way I would look at it too. The LCMS is one of
to read. Oh, I love that.
Well, he's right. The LCMS is the only denomination that isn't completely illiterate. You know, I mean, the thing is that
I mean, there are Reformed churches that are against women ministers who believe that the Bible is the Word of God, who hold.
But the
to
Reformed
historic
churches who
confessions.
believe in that, I would suggest to you, their problem is again
The difference
they're
between Reformed and
illiterate.
Lutheran theology.
They're
you know?
illiterate because
They're-
they can't read the words. This is my body. This is my blood. They don't. They,
Oh,
they-
my.
they
which is
can't
why
read.
we need to discuss
Okay.
Reformed and Lutheran differences.
Yeah.
And but that's going to be for the next podcast.
I guess. Yeah, I think so.
Hey, I'm tired, guys. Let's go on.
Anyway,
Okay.
uh,
I think we're good, man. I think we're good. I think it's been a good conversation.
Yeah.
I think we covered a lot of good
well, we'll continue talking about the
stuff.
election
Pretty
and
wild.
things
No,
that
I don't want to talk
unfold.
about the election anymore.
But
after
next
this.
week we're
I'm
gonna-
done with it.
Who knows what will happen next week? That we
Well, it
can,
doesn't matter what you want to talk
the
about.
DC could be
I
on
mean,
fire and there
who
could be an
knows?
army on its way
Yeah,
to
yeah.
Pittsburgh. You know, what I mean,
But
if that
it
comes
doesn't.
up, we might have
hey,
to discuss
it
it.
doesn't matter what you want to talk about. All that matters is what I want to talk about. So,
Wow. Who are you?
but next week we're gonna talk about. We're going to consider further the differences between Lutheran and Reformed theology.
We already talked about the
And,
sacraments, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, we did talk
We
about
did, but-
several
but-
positions,
but
but
that didn't work out. So.
we have to talk. I think
Wait,
we
no,
have to
that one's good,
consider
though, isn't it?
some.
No.
Huh?
That podcast didn't.
Oh
No.
no.
What?
No, it
No.
didn't.
So we have to start over then. We can't just
Yeah.
talk about
Right,
Darkness
right.
Nation. We have to start over.
That's
with
what
the
I was trying to
sacraments
tell
and
you.
everything.
We have to start over.
I didn't know that one was bad. I thought it was just the Roman Catholic one that was bad.
No, ours was no. The first, the Roman Catholic one.
That one was bad.
Yeah.
That
Oh,
one's
okay.
bad.
Yeah.
Oh,
The
so
la-
there's another one out there in
the one that we did.
in the
Wait,
Netherlands.
anyway,
The one on Lutheran theology is good that we did so far.
Yeah. Anyway, yes.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
good. We're fine.
We're good.
Yeah.
Is that
Anyway,
up?
I haven't gotten it up yet,
Oh,
but
okay.
Oh,
I'm
that's
going
why
to.
there's confusion.
I'm going to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Loser.
Anyway,
Loser.
next week we're going to talk
Loser.
about double predestination. How about we talk
Yes.
about that?
Yeah.
We talk about double predestination and differences in Lutheran and Reformed understanding of election.
Yeah, and also how
Yeah.
mystery works in theology. The question of like I would call it theological piety, doctrine of two wills in God. The Reformed
Well,
doctrine.
that kind of
needs to be
goes along
addressed.
with election too. That mystery.
Yeah.
You know, the thing is, the elector a mystery. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a mystery known only to God.
Yeah,
It's a
like
mystery
there's-
which we'll reserve for next week.
Yeah.
But
That sounds
with
good.
that being said, this is Deus Volt Radio signing off. You have been listening to the Deus Volt Radio Show. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content.